My name is Anna, and I am an Omega. In the kingdom of Varjan, this means I am nothing. A whisper in the grand hall, a shadow in the pack, destined for a life of silent service and quiet oblivion. But my grandmother used to tell me a different story, one she whispered by the dying embers of our hearth. She said our bloodline was ancient, that we were the keepers of the moon's mercy, healers and soothers of the soul. That legacy died with her, leaving only me, Anna, the last of a forgotten line, serving in the vast, cold kitchens of Stonehaven Keep. I remember the day the world shifted. It was the eve of the Alpha King's return from the Northern Wars. The keep thrummed with frantic energy. Lords and warriors of high rank, betas and alphas all, filled the halls with their boisterous claims. They spoke of the king, Kaelen Blackmane, with a mix of reverence and fear. They called him the Beast not just for his prowess in battle, but for the ferocious, untamed power that radiated from him. He was a ruler who commanded absolute loyalty through strength, a king who had never once knelt. I was tasked with carrying a heavy tray of spiced wine to the antechamber where the high-ranked wolves boasted. My shoulders ached and I kept my eyes down, the perfect, invisible Omega. As I entered, a massive alpha named Torvin, his beard flecked with gray and arrogance, was holding court. "The beast returns victorious," Torvin declared, his voice like grinding stones. "But even a king must be guided. The Northern Alliance is fragile. We must command his ear, steer his rage towards the eastern clans. We must make the beast kneel to our collective wisdom." A murmur of agreement rose, but it was laced with unease. Command Kaelen Blackmane, it was a fool's thought. As I set the tray down, my hand, calloused from scrubbing pots, trembled slightly. A single goblet wobbled. I caught it before it fell, but the soft clink echoed in a sudden lull. Torvin's gaze, sharp and dismissive, fell upon me. "Clumsy Omega, you disrupt council talk. Perhaps you need a lesson in stillness." His power, a dense, oppressive weight, pushed down on me. It was the common way, an alpha asserting dominance over the lowest. My instinct, my Omega nature, was to submit, to curl inward, but something sparked in my chest. A memory of my grandmother's voice. Our strength is not in resisting the wave, but in letting it pass through us and finding the calm beneath. I did not cower. I simply took a slow breath, met his gaze for a fleeting second, and then looked down, not in submission but in completion of my task. The oppressive weight seemed to slide off me, finding no purchase. A strange silence followed. Torvin frowned, confused by the lack of the expected fearful reaction. He opened his mouth to speak again when the great oak doors of the hall blew open. Cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine, iron, and wild power. He stood there, Kaelen Blackmane. He was taller than any man in the room, his broad shoulders clad in battle-worn leather and gray fur. His hair was the color of a raven's wing, tied back, and his eyes, they were not the gold of most alphas. They were a pale, piercing silver, like moonlight on a frozen lake. They swept the room, and every wolf, even Torvin, dropped their gaze in immediate deference. The beast had returned. His silver eyes passed over the lords, over Torvin, and for a heartbeat they rested on me. I felt it like a physical touch, not aggressive but searching. In that moment I was not an invisible Omega girl, I was seen. Then his gaze moved on and the spell broke. He strode to the high table, the crowd parting like wheat before a scythe. "My king," Torvin began, recovering his bluster. "We were just discussing the strategy for the eastern borders. We have counsel." "I did not ask for it." Kaelen's voice cut through the air, low and resonant, vibrating in the stone itself. He did not shout. He did not need to. He sat upon the throne of jagged stone and ancient wood, his presence filling the entire keep. "I have fought for 3 moons in the frozen north. I do not return to hear the prattling of those who warmed their hides by my fire." Torvin flushed. "We only seek to guide the kingdom's might, your strength, to ensure the beast is commanded by wisdom." Kaelen's lip curled. He leaned forward and the air grew thick with the promise of storm. You seek to command me." It was then his eyes found me again. I was frozen by the wall, unable to leave. His gaze pinned me. "You," he said, the single word silencing the last of the whispers. "Omega, come here." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. I had drawn the king's ire with my earlier stillness. I would be made an example of. I forced my feet to move, each step echoing in the deathly quiet hall. I stopped before the dais, my head bowed. "Look at me," he commanded. I raised my eyes to his silver ones. Up close, the power emanating from him was a torrent, a howling gale of force and will. It was terrifying, it was exhilarating. I did not look away. "You were in the antechamber," he stated. "You heard this one speak of commanding the beast. What say you?" A gasp rippled through the hall. The king was asking an Omega for an opinion on a matter of state. It was unheard of. Torvin glared daggers at me. My mouth was dry. I thought of my grandmother's stories. I thought of the quiet strength of the moon, which does not fight the night but rules it simply by being. I found my voice soft but clear in the vast silence. "A river cannot be commanded, my king," I said. "It can only be channeled. A storm cannot be bowed to wisdom. It can only be weathered or respected. To command a force of nature is to misunderstand it completely." For a long, agonizing moment, Kaelen Blackmane said nothing. The silver in his eyes seemed to swirl. Then he did something that would become legend. The mighty Alpha King, the untamed beast, the warrior who had never bowed to any living soul, rose from his throne. He stepped down from the dais until he stood directly before me, not towering over me, but with me. And then he knelt, one knee touched the cold stone floor. His head dipped in a slow, deliberate nod of acknowledgement. The entire hold ceased to breathe. His voice, when he spoke, was for me alone, yet it carried to every stunned ear. "The river finds its own course. The storm sees its own truth, and the beast," he said, his eyes locked with mine, "recognizes its Luna." The word hung in the air. Luna, queen, mate. It was impossible. An Omega, a kitchen servant, a nobody. Yet he had knelt, not to command, to claim. And in that moment, as the world shattered and reformed around me, I knew my grandmother's stories were not just tales. They were a prophecy, and it had just begun. The silence that followed King Kaelen's declaration was not peaceful. It was a taut, living thing, strained with disbelief and a simmering, dangerous shock. I, Anna, the Omega from the kitchens, stood rooted to the spot, feeling the weight of 100 stares like physical blows. The silver in his eyes hadn't wavered. It held me, a lifeline in a suddenly upended world. He rose from his knee, the movement fluid and powerful, and the spell over the hall broke into a chaos of murmured outrage and confusion. Torvin's face was a thundercloud of purple rage. "My king, this is unprecedented. An Omega, a servant. The Luna must be of strong, noble blood to bolster the pack's might." Kaelen didn't even look at him. His gaze remained on me, assessing, curious. "Strength has many forms, Torvin. You who just tried to crush her spirit with your own felt none of hers push back. Yet here you stand, unharmed, while she remains unbent. That is a power your noble blood has never understood." He then spoke, his voice cutting through the din, not as a roar but as a final decree. "The matter is not for discussion. She is recognized." He turned and walked back to the high table, the conversation effectively murdered. But his last action was a quiet command to the stern beta female who oversaw the household, Lysandra. "See her to the moon tower chambers. Now." Lysandra, her face an impassive mask, approached me. Her eyes, however, held a flicker of something complex, not kindness but a sharp calculation. "Come," was all she said. I followed her, my legs moving on numb autopilot, out of the great hall, away from the burning stairs. We left through a side passage, climbing a narrow, spiraling staircase of worn stone that I had never been permitted to use. The sounds of the feast faded, replaced by the echo of our footsteps and the frantic beating of my own heart. The Moon Tower. It was a place of legend, the traditional dwelling of the Luna, empty for decades since Kaelen's mother had passed. You have upended centuries of tradition, Lysandra said suddenly, her voice cool in the dim stairwell. That is either very foolish or very brave, usually it is both. I did nothing, I whispered, my own voice sounding foreign to me. You did everything, she corrected. You stood where others crumble, you spoke a truth others are too blind or too proud to see. That is more action than any sword swing in that hall tonight. She stopped before an arched door of dark, carved wood. This is your prison now. Gilded, but a prison nonetheless. They will come for you, girl, Torvin and his allies. They see the king's claim not as destiny, but as a weakness to be exploited. Your life is now a piece on the board. She pushed the door open. The room took my breath away. It was circular, following the tower's shape, with tall, arched windows open to the night sky. The moon, nearly full, poured liquid silver light onto a floor of polished blue stone. Tapestries depicting wolves under celestial bodies adorned the walls, and a large bed with silvery hangings stood opposite a cold, elegant fireplace. It was the most beautiful space I had ever seen, and it felt utterly, completely alien. Rest if you can, Lysandra said. The king will send for you at dawn. With that she left, closing the door with a soft but definitive click. Alone, the enormity of it all crashed down. I was Anna, who mended linens and scrubbed roots, not a Luna. I walked to the window, the stone sill cool beneath my palms, and looked out over the sleeping kingdom of Vargin, the forests a dark sea under the starry sky. What did he see? I replayed the moment in the antechamber. I hadn't fought Torvin's dominance, I had sidestepped it. My grandmother's lessons had been practical, little meditations to endure a hard life. When the weight is too great, my little moonbeam, don't push up, sink down into your own roots, let the earth hold you. Was that power? It felt like survival. A soft sound made me turn. A young maid, a delta by her scent, stood hesitantly in a side doorway I hadn't noticed. She curtsied deeply, her eyes wide. Mistress Anna, I am Liana. I've been assigned to attend you. She held a simple linen nightdress, finer than anything I'd ever owned. The pity in her eyes was worse than Torvin's scorn. She saw a rabbit placed in a wolf's den. I took the gown. Thank you, Liana, please just Anna. She helped me out of my coarse kitchen smock, and the touch of the clean, soft linen against my skin was another stark reminder of the chasm I had crossed. Sleep was a distant prospect. I lay in the vast bed, staring at the play of moonlight on the canopy, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the high tower, the wind singing through the stone, the distant call of a night bird. I must have drifted, for the dream came vividly. I was in a sun-drenched meadow that felt achingly familiar, like a memory from a past life. My grandmother was there, but younger, her hands glowing with a soft, silvery light as she tended to a great, wounded wolf with fur the color of midnight. She sang a lullaby, a melody of winding streams and settling dusk, and the wolf's pained whimpers subsided, its fierce eyes softening into peace. Then the dream shifted. I saw the same meadow, but now it was night, and dark figures with no faces were setting torch to a beautiful, crystalline temple. The song turned to a scream in the wind. A single word echoed, "Keeper." I woke with a start, the first gray light of dawn at the windows. My cheeks were wet with tears. The dream's resonance was too deep to ignore. The moon's mercy, the keeper, it was all real. A firm knock came at the main door. It was Lysandra. The king awaits you in the solar. Arm yourself, girl, not with a blade, with your truth. Her advice was cryptic, but her meaning was clear. The first battle of the day was about to begin. He wasn't in the grand throne room. The solar was a smaller, more private chamber lined with books and maps. Kaelen stood by a window, silhouetted against the morning light. He wore simple dark trousers and a tunic, the mighty beast seeming contemplative. He turned as I entered, and the force of his presence was still a physical thing, but the sharp edges of last night's power were sheathed. You did not sleep well, he stated, his silver eyes missing nothing. The bed was too soft, I answered honestly, then flushed. It was a foolish thing to say to a king. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, and the dreams were too hard. I startled. How did you know? I am an alpha of considerable power, Anna. The distress in an Omega's scent, especially one now so linked to my awareness, is plain. Tell me of them. So I did. I spoke of my grandmother, the healing, the lullaby, the burning temple. He listened, utterly still, and when I finished, he walked to a heavy oak table and unrolled an ancient-looking vellum. This is a map of Vargin from 5 generations past, he said, his finger pointing to a clearing in the whispering woods. Here, the Temple of the Moon's Mercy. The seat of the Keeper line, it was said to be a place of healing and balance for all packs. It was destroyed in a great purge, a time of war where such gentle arts were seen as a weakness. He looked at me. Your line was not merely noble, Anna, it was sacred, and it was systematically erased. You are not just an Omega, you are the last living key to something my kingdom has lost, and its absence has made us all harsher, me included. His confession hung in the air. He had not claimed me on a whim, he had sensed the legacy in my blood, the dormant power that could soothe the very beast they all feared. What would you have me do, my king? I asked. For now, he said, his voice low, learn. Lysandra will tutor you in courtly ways, not to change you, but to help you navigate the vipers, and I would ask you to try something. He seemed almost hesitant, a look so foreign on his fierce face. The power you used to deflect Torvin, that calm. My own power, the beast as they call it, is a constant storm. It is useful in war, but it erodes peace. Would you be willing to simply be near me while I work, to see if your presence, this keeper's nature, has any effect? It was not a command, it was a request. An Alpha King was asking an Omega for help. In that moment, I saw not the untamed monarch, but a ruler carrying a crushing, lonely burden. The dream of my grandmother healing the great wolf flashed before my eyes. I met his silver gaze and gave a slow, steady nod. I can try. For the first time, I saw true relief in his eyes. The crown he had placed upon my head was unwanted, forged from forgotten legacy and political danger, but the purpose he now offered. That felt like the first true touch of my destiny. The keeper was awakening, and she had her first patient, the king himself. My new life settled into a surreal rhythm. Mornings were spent with Lysandra in a sunlit parlor adjacent to the moon tower. She was a relentless tutor. Aluna does not shuffle, she would say as I practiced walking across the room with a book balanced on my head. She glides, she is a swan on water, all effortless grace while paddling furiously beneath the surface. The metaphor was apt. I was learning the surface, which fork to use, how to address a visiting alpha from the eastern marches, the complex heraldry of allied packs. But beneath my mind was a whirlpool of anxiety and strange, dawning awareness. My afternoons, however, belonged to the king. I would join him in the solar, as per his request. At first, it was merely presence. He would pore over missives and tax ledgers, his brow furrowed, the air around him crackling with a restrained intensity. I would sit in a chair by the hearth with a piece of embroidery I was terrible at, or one of the books from his shelves, histories I'd never dreamed of accessing. I simply existed, and I practiced my grandmother's teachings. When the weight of his suppressed frustration or simmering anger thickened the air, I didn't resist it. I imagined myself as a deep, still pool in the woods, letting the disturbance ripple over my surface but not penetrate my depths. I would breathe slowly in time with the flicker of the fire, and sometimes I would hum the fragment of the lullaby from my dream. The effect was subtle but profound. On the third day, I noticed his shoulders, perpetually tensed as if ready for battle, began to lower. The sharp, agitated scent of alpha distress that often clung to the room would gradually soften, replaced by the cleaner scent of pine and snowfall. He never mentioned it, but the sessions grew longer. He began to ask my opinion, not on matters of state, but on people. Lord Jaren from the southern fenlands brings a grievance today, he said one afternoon, not looking up from a scroll. His report is all bluster and bruised pride. What does your intuition, your Omega's sense, tell you? I set down my book, considering. I had seen Lord Jaren in the hall, a blustering man, but his eyes had held a genuine worry for his people when he thought no one was looking. The pride is a shield, my king, I ventured carefully. I think the true wound is beneath. He fears appearing weak to you, so he wraps his fear in anger. Listen past the bluster. The core of his complaint may be valid. Kaelen looked at me then, a long, considering look. When Lord Jaren was admitted, Kaelen disarmed him immediately. Set your pride aside, Jaren. The Fenlands are flooding. Tell me what your people need, not what you think will make you sound strong. Jaren's bluster evaporated into stunned, relieved honesty. The meeting ended with practical plans for aid, not posturing. After the Lord left, Kaelen nodded to me. A river finds its own course, he murmured, echoing my words from the first night. You see the true bed beneath the turbulent water. It was the first compliment he'd given me, and it warmed me more than any hearth fire. But the peace of our afternoons was an island in a treacherous sea. Torvin's faction grew bolder in their resistance. Whispers slithered through Stonehaven, the beast is tamed. The Omega has bewitched him with forbidden arts. She weakens the pack's heart for her own rise. I felt their hostility like a cold draft in every corridor. My meals, taken in my chambers, were tested by a loyal taster, a grim precaution Lysandra insisted upon. The breaking point came a week later. A formal council was convened to discuss the renewed threat from the eastern clans, the very ones Torvin had wanted to attack. I was expected to attend as the recognized Luna, a test by fire. The council chamber was a ring of stone and grim faces. I sat on a smaller chair beside Kaelen's massive throne, feeling smaller than I ever had in the kitchens. Torvin led the charge. The Easterners raid our borders, stealing cattle and challenging our patrols. We must answer with overwhelming force, burn their villages, show them the fangs of the beast. His allies roared approval. Kaelen listened, his expression unreadable. And if we burn their villages, Torvin, what do their warriors, with nothing left to lose, do next? They do not vanish, they come here with nothing left to lose. Then we crush them utterly. Torvin slammed a fist on the table. Creating a wasteland on our border and a generation of bitter enemies is not strength, it is poor strategy, Kaelen countered, his voice dangerously calm. Strategy? Torvin sneered, his eyes flicking to me. Or is it the soft counsel you now keep? We see the change in you, my king. You hesitate, you talk of channels and respect. The beast does not respect vermin, it exterminates them. The insult to Kaelen was clear, but the threat to me was clearer. The room held its breath. Kaelen's power began to press outward, a suffocating wave of icy rage. I could see the beast rising in his silver eyes, and a part of me quailed. But another part, the keeper part born from dreams and blood, stirred. This was the storm. Not on a ledger, but in the heart of the pack. I remembered my purpose. I did not speak. I simply breathed in, centering myself, and let my own presence, what little I understood of it, unfold. It wasn't a push, it was an offering of stillness. I imagined that deep, clear pool in the woods, and I let its calm radiate from me, a silent counterpoint to the building fury. I looked not at Torvin, but at Kaelen. Our eyes met. In his I saw the raging tempest. I held his gaze, steady, unafraid, and slowly shook my head, not in defiance, but in a silent plea, not like this. The expansion of his power halted. The crushing pressure in the room didn't vanish, but it stopped growing. He took a long, controlled breath, the silver in his eyes receding from a blinding blizzard to a hard, focused frost. You mistake deliberation for weakness, Torvin, Kaelen said, his voice now like a razor wrapped in silk. And you mistake my Luna's presence for softening, it is tempering. Steel is hardened by fire, but it is made resilient by the careful, cool quench. We will send an envoy. We will show strength at our borders, but we will also offer terms, a show of force and a path to peace. That is how a lasting kingdom is built, not on piles of ash. The plan was a masterstroke, acknowledging the need for strength while offering a smarter, more permanent solution. Even some of Torvin's allies looked thoughtful. Torvin himself was speechless, outmaneuvered not by a shout but by a superior vision. After the council adjourned, Kaelen waited until we were alone in the solar. He stood by the window, his back to me for a long time. "You stopped me today," he finally said, his voice low. "I did nothing," I replied, the now familiar phrase taking on new meaning. He turned, and his expression was one of awe. "You did everything. For years, when challenged like that, the beast would rise and blood would be the only answer. Today I felt it rise, and then I felt an anchor, a stillness, your stillness. It gave me a moment to choose rather than react." He stepped closer, and for the first time he raised a hand, hesitating before gently placing his fingertips under my chin, lifting my face to his. The touch was electric, but not romantic. It was one of profound, solemn connection. "They call you the one who made the beast kneel. They are wrong. You are the one who allows the king to stand taller." In that moment, the unwanted crown felt less like a burden and more like a tool. The political vipers still coiled in the shadows, and the mystery of my burnt temple awaited. But I had passed the true test. I had faced the storm within the Alpha King, and without a single weapon helped him calm it. The Keeper's power was real, and it was the one thing in all of Vargin that could match the beast. The success of the envoy to the eastern clans, a mix of firm showmanship and fair terms delivered by Kaelen's most diplomatic beta, bought us a fragile peace. It also deepened the rift in court. To some, Kaelen was a visionary king. To Torvin's faction, he was a compromised ruler, his will diluted by an Omega's influence. The whispers grew more sinister, now suggesting I used dark, old magic to cloud the king's judgment. I found my refuge in two places: the quiet afternoons with Kaelen, which had evolved into a comfortable, wordless partnership, and the castle archives. With Lysandra's grudging help, she saw it as a more productive use of my time than moping in a tower. I gained access to the dust-laden records room. I was looking for any mention of the Temple of the Moon's Mercy, the Keeper line, anything. The official histories were barren, as if the pages had been scrubbed clean. But in a forgotten corner, buried under crumbling scrolls on grain yields, I found a small, leather-bound diary. Its cover was embossed with a faded crescent moon. My heart leapt into my throat. It was written by a woman named Selene over 200 years past. Her words were not those of a historian, but of a healer. Third day of the frost moon. Young Alpha Arlen was brought in, his mind shattered from a rogue's power assault. The fury in him was a beast untethered. I sang the song of deep roots, and slowly the beast remembered it had a den. He slept for a day and a night and woke clear-eyed. The gift is not dominance, it is remembrance. We help them remember their own peace. I read, hunched over the small desk in the archives, tears blurring the careful script. Here was proof: my grandmother's stories, my dreams, they were all real. Selene described ceremonies under the full moon, healing rituals using herbs and harmony, a school for gifted Omegas. The diary was a treasure trove of lost knowledge, ending abruptly. The last entry was frantic, smudged with what looked like ancient tears. "They are coming, the shadowed ones. They say our gift is a perversion, that it makes alphas weak. They have turned the king's ear. We must hide the heartstone. Without it, the temple is but stone. May the moon hide us, Selene." The heartstone, the words pulsed in my mind with an instinctual recognition. I had to find it, but where, and who were the shadowed ones? The purge had been successful, no such faction existed now. Or did they? That night my dream was not a memory, but a message. I stood in the ruins of the temple, moonlight filtering through shattered crystal roof. Before me, in the center of a mosaic floor depicting the phases of the moon, was a small, empty pedestal. A voice like wind through reeds whispered, beneath the keeper's tears, where the silver line meets the heart of the old wood. I woke with the phrase etched in my mind. The next day, during my afternoon with Kaelen, I was distracted, the diary's revelations and the dream's riddle tumbling in my head. He noticed immediately. "Your scent is troubled, more than the usual courtly annoyance," he stated, setting aside a missive. I made a decision. Trust had to be given to be received. I told him everything about finding Seleni's diary, the heartstone, the shadowed ones, and my dream. He listened with intense focus. When I finished, he stood and went to a large, detailed map of Vargin pinned to the wall, the Whispering Woods. "The temple is here," he pointed. "A silver line, a river perhaps, the heart of the old wood could be the great sentinel, an ancient oak that marks the forest center." His finger traced a silvery thread on the map, the Moonwash River that indeed ran through the woods. "It passes within a league of the sentinel." Hope flared in me. We could go, we could find it. His face grew grave. "Leaving Stonehaven now, with Torvin looking for any excuse to challenge my control, is risky. And a journey into the deep woods is not without danger from creatures and terrain." He saw my face fall and his expression softened. "But this is your legacy, and if this heartstone holds power to restore balance, it is the kingdom's legacy too. We will go, secretly." And soon, the plan was formed with military precision. We would use the pretext of a routine border patrol to the north. Kaelen, myself, and a small, hand-picked guard of his most loyal warriors, including the stoic Captain Rylan, would divert into the Whispering Woods. Lysandra would cover my absence, claiming I was sequestered in the Moon Tower for a period of reflection. 3 days later, under the cover of a misty dawn, we left. Dressed in practical riding clothes, a cloak hiding my face, I rode beside Kaelen. The freedom of the open road, the scent of damp earth and pine, was intoxicating after the stone confines of the keep. For a few hours, I wasn't a disputed Luna or a last keeper. I was just Anna, riding under a vast sky. Captain Rylan, a man of few words, kept a vigilant perimeter. "The woods are quiet, too quiet," he muttered as we entered the shadow of the ancient trees. The Whispering Woods earned its name. The wind through the towering pines did sound like hushed voices. We followed the Moonwash River, its waters shimmering like liquid silver. The deeper we went, the more the dream's landscape matched reality. My pulse quickened with a sense of homecoming laced with profound sadness. We found the great sentinel by midday. It was a colossal oak, its trunk wider than 5 horses, its branches a canopy over the forest floor. The Moonwash River curved gently nearby. "Beneath the keeper's tears, where the silver line meets the heart of the old wood," I whispered, dismounting. I walked to the base of the mighty tree, where its great roots formed a knotted throne above the earth. The river's silver line was close, but what were the keeper's tears? I thought of Seleni's final, tear-stained entry, of generations of loss. I felt the weight of it all, and my own eyes grew hot with unshed tears for a legacy I never knew I carried. One tear escaped, tracing a path down my cheek and falling to the mossy ground at the junction of 2 massive roots. And then I felt it, a faint, silvery glow emanated from where my tear had fallen. A soft hum, like the echo of Seleni's lullaby, vibrated in the air. The moss and soil seemed to shimmer and part, revealing a hidden compartment within the root's hollow. Nestled inside, glowing with a soft, internal moonlight, was a stone. It was no larger than my palm, crystalline, and it seemed to hold a swirling nebula of silver and blue within its heart. The heartstone. A collective gasp went through our party. I reached in, my fingers trembling, and lifted it. It was warm, not hot, and the moment it touched my skin, a wave of pure, calming energy washed through me, so potent it made the gentle pool of my own power feel like a puddle compared to an ocean. The very air around us seemed to sigh, the forest exhaling a breath held for centuries. Kaelen approached, his eyes wide. "The stories were true," he breathed, but the moment of wonder was shattered by a sound that didn't belong to the woods, the sharp twang of a crossbow. A bolt hissed through the air, aimed directly at my heart. Time seemed to slow. I was frozen, clutching the stone, but Kaelen was a blur of motion. He knocked me aside with a controlled shove, the bolt grazing his shoulder instead of striking me. He let out a roar of pure fury that shook the leaves from the trees. "Ambush," Captain Rylan yelled as a dozen figures clad in dark, nondescript leathers melted from the shadows. They moved with a coordinated, silent lethality. These were not bandits, they were assassins. The beast was unleashed. Kaelen shifted in a burst of fur and fury, a colossal wolf of midnight black with eyes of burning silver. He tore into the nearest attackers. Our guards, shifted as well, formed a protective circle around me. The clash was brutal, swift, and bloody. The assassins were skilled, but they were no match for the king's rage and his elite guard. As quickly as it began, it was over. The surviving assassins, seeing their failure, melted back into the woods. Kaelen, still in his wolf form, stood panting over the fallen, his muzzle stained. He shifted back, his shoulder bleeding from the bolt graze, his face a mask of cold wrath. He strode to one of the dying assassins, pulling down the man's hood. The man's neck bore a tattoo, a stylized wolf's skull, shrouded in what looked like tendrils of smoke. "The shadowed ones," Kaelen snarled, his voice guttural. "They are not a ghost story, they are here, and they knew we were coming." The trip back to Stonehaven was a tense, silent race against any further ambush. The heartstone, now wrapped and hidden in my clothes, pulsed against my skin, a beacon of hope and a target. We had found the key to my legacy, but we had also awakened an ancient enemy. Someone had betrayed our secret mission. The vipers weren't just in the court. They were in our very walls, and they had just shown their fangs. The return to Stonehaven was a grim procession. The weight of the heartstone against my chest felt less like a treasure and more like a lodestone drawing danger. Kaelen's shoulder was bandaged, a stark white against his dark tunic, a constant, silent reminder of the bolt meant for me. His silence was a storm contained, the beast prowling just beneath his skin, wounded and furious. We did not return to fanfare. We slipped in through a postern gate under the cloak of a moonless night, the air thick with the scent of coming rain and betrayal. The few who saw us, stable hands, a night watchman, averted their eyes, sensing the lethal tension radiating from their king. Lysandra met us in the private royal chambers, her stern face paler than usual. She took one look at Kaelen's wound, my disheveled state, and the grim set of Captain Ryland's jaw, and understood. Without a word, she fetched water, salve, and clean linen. "The court believes the Luna is in seclusion, as planned," she reported tersely as she helped Kaelen remove his tunic to tend the graze. "But Lord Torvin has been unusually inquisitive. He's questioned the guards on the North Gate rotation twice." Kaelen's eyes, chips of frozen mercury, met mine. The ambush was too precise. They knew the location, they knew the timing. Someone in this keep sent word to these shadowed ones. He winced as Lysandra applied the antiseptic salve. The tattoo, a wolf's skull in smoke. "I've seen that mark before in the oldest records of the purges. They were the king's executioners then, a secret order tasked with eradicating the keeper line. They were thought disbanded. They've been sleeping," I whispered, my fingers unconsciously curling around the shape of the stone beneath my clothes. "And we've woken them." The heartstone seemed to pulse in agreement, a soft, anxious rhythm. For the first time, I actively tried to reach for the calm it represented, to push it outward into the tense room. I focused on my breathing, on the memory of the deep forest pool, and imagined that calming energy flowing from the stone, through me, and into the space around Kaelen. The effect was immediate and profound. The jagged edges of his anger in the air seemed to soften, sanded down by a wave of serene moonlight. His shoulders, braced against the pain, relaxed a fraction. He let out a long, slow breath, his gaze finding mine with a look of stunned gratitude. "How did you do that?" Lysandra asked, her healer's eyes missing nothing. "The stone, it amplifies," I said, unsure how else to explain it. "It's like a lens for whatever piece I can find." Then we must protect it, and you with everything we have, Kaelen stated, his voice regaining its steely control. Rylan, double the guard on the moon tower, discreetly. Lysandra, I want a list of everyone who had knowledge of our route, even in part. From the groom who saddled our horses to the cook who packed the provisions. The hunt for the traitor began in the shadows. The next few days were a lesson in paranoia. Every glance in the great hall felt loaded. Every whispered conversation seemed to be about me. I resumed my place in the solar with Kaelen, the heartstone now kept in a small, iron-bound chest under heavy guard in the moon tower. Our sessions were different. The quiet companionship was still there, but it was now underlined with a shared, vigilant purpose. We pored over the list Lysandra provided, a depressingly long scroll of names. It could be any of them, I murmured, feeling overwhelmed, or someone who simply guessed. No, Kaelen said, his finger tapping a name. They knew about the Sentinel Oak. That detail was known only to you, me, Rylan, and Lysandra, and it was in Seleni's diary, which only you have read. A cold dread settled in my stomach. The circle was impossibly small. Rylan, who had fought so fiercely to protect us. Lysandra, whose loyalty to the crown was her defining trait, it was unthinkable. The answer came from an unexpected source, Liana, my timid maid. She was cleaning the hearth in my tower chamber when she suddenly spoke, her voice trembling. Mistress Anna, I saw something. The night before you left, I put down the book of heraldry I was pretending to study. What did you see, Liana? She wrung her hands. I couldn't sleep. I went to the kitchen for some milk. On my way back, I saw Captain Rylan. He wasn't on duty. He was in the lower corridor near the old armory. He was talking to someone, a man in a hooded cloak. I thought it was strange, but I hurried past. Later, when I heard about the attack in the woods, I remembered. The man's cloak, it had a strange clasp, like a twisted knot of thorns. Rylan, my heart sank like a stone. The brave captain, Kaelen's trusted right hand. The evidence was circumstantial, but the coincidence was glaring. I didn't want to believe it. I had to tell Kaelen, but the thought of accusing his loyal captain sickened me. That evening, during our solar session, I couldn't focus. The words of Seleni's diary swam before my eyes. The gift is not dominance, it is remembrance. Perhaps finding the truth wasn't about accusation, but about prompting remembrance. Kaelen, I said softly, breaking our comfortable silence, you've known Rylan since you were boys, yes? He looked up, wary at the shift in topic, since we were pups. He stood by me during the challenge for the throne. His loyalty has never been in question. Loyalty can be a complex thing, I ventured, choosing my words with care. One can be loyal to a person, to a crown, or to an idea of what they believe is best for the kingdom, an idea someone else might have planted long ago. He studied me, his alpha senses clearly detecting my deep unease. What are you saying, Anna? I took a steadying breath. I am saying that sometimes the past has longer claws than we know. The shadowed ones didn't just target keepers, they recruited. They convinced alphas that the keeper's peace was a poison. What if that belief was passed down? A secret loyalty hidden even from oneself until awakened. Understanding dawned in his silver eyes, followed by a pained grimace. He stood abruptly and walked to the window. Rylan's father, he said, his voice heavy. He was a guardsman in my grandfather's time. He died in a skirmish with border raiders, but there were always whispers that his sympathies lay with the old, purest ways, that he thought the kingdom had gone soft. He turned back to me, his face a battlefield of betrayal and reluctant logic. You have reason to suspect him. I have a witness who saw him in a clandestine meeting the night before we left, I confessed, the words tasting like ash, a hooded man with a thorn knot clasp. Kaelen closed his eyes. For a long moment he was the very image of the burdened king. Then the ruler reasserted himself. We will not confront him, not yet. We will set a watch, and we will lay a trap. The plan was a delicate web. Kaelen let it be known in the strictest confidence to Rylan alone that I had deciphered another clue from the diary, the location of a secondary vault, a hidden library of the Keeper line in a secluded cave system a day's ride to the south. It was a complete fabrication. We would prepare to go, with Rylan leading the guard detail. If he was loyal, he would simply follow orders. If he was the traitor, he would find a way to warn his masters. The night before the planned departure, I waited in the moon tower, anxiety a live wire in my veins. The heartstone in its chest seemed to hum a low, warning tune. I was practicing the deep breathing exercises when a soft, almost imperceptible scratch came at the door to the servants' passage, not the main entrance. It was Liana, her face a mask of terror. She slipped inside and shoved a small, rolled parchment into my hand. "A stable boy, one of Rylan's men, gave me a silver coin to bring this to you. He said it was from a friend, a warning. I'm so scared, mistress." With trembling fingers, I unrolled it. The script was elegant and anonymous, the thorned circle nose of the false trail. The true target remains the heart. The tower is not safe. Trust the white fox. The message was a chaos of implications, the thorned circle, clearly the shadowed ones. They knew our trap was a trap. And they were coming here, tonight, for the stone, and for me. White fox, I muttered. There was only one person in the keep who had a cloak lined with white fox fur, Lysandra. The door to my main chamber burst open then, not with stealth, but with violent force. Captain Rylan stood there, but not the Rylan I knew. His face was stripped of its usual stoic loyalty, replaced by a fanatical coldness. Two hard-eyed guards I didn't recognize flanked him. "The Omega and the artifact," he said, his voice devoid of all warmth. "The circle commands it." Liana screamed. I backed away, my heart hammering. The betrayal was a physical blow. Rylan took a step forward, his hand on his sword hilt. "The king is occupied with a fabricated border alarm. Your calming tricks won't help you now. The beast is being led on a merry chase. Come quietly. The circle wishes to study you before your end." As he advanced, the door from the servants' passage flew open again. Lysandra stood there, not in her usual severe dress, but in dark, practical leathers, a short sword in her hand. Her eyes swept the scene, landing on Rylan with a look of pure contempt. "I always thought you were a blunt instrument, Rylan," she said, her voice like cracking ice. "I never took you for a fool. Step away from the Luna." The white fox, the warning. Lysandra was the ally in the shadows. Rylan snarled. "The seneschal's hound, you're too late." He gestured to his men. "Take them both." The confined space of the tower chamber erupted into violence. Lysandra moved with a deadly, efficient grace I never could have imagined, parrying a blow from one guard and driving her sword into his thigh. I was weaponless, backed against the hearth. Rylan came for me, his intent clear. In that moment of sheer terror, I didn't think of fighting. I thought of the heartstone. I lunged for the iron-bound chest, flicked the latch and grabbed the stone. Its warmth flooded my arm. I turned, clutching it to my chest, and faced Rylan. I didn't try to be calm. I poured every ounce of my fear, my desperation, my will to protect this last piece of my heritage into the stone. I thought of Seleni's song, of my grandmother's lullaby, of the deep, unshakable peace at the center of all things. A visible pulse of silvery light erupted from the heartstone. It didn't hurt. It was a wave of pure, overwhelming stillness. It washed over Rylan. He froze mid-stride. The fanatical rage on his face melted into confusion, then a dawning, horrific clarity. His sword clattered to the floor. He looked at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time, then at me, his eyes wide with a grief 2 generations deep. What have I done?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "My father, his oath, I didn't know the poison was in the blood." He crumpled to his knees, sobbing, not in submission to an alpha, but in shattered remorse for a life lived in service to a hidden, hateful lie. The other guard, seeing his captain broken and Lysandra standing ready, dropped his weapon and surrendered. The fight was over. The immediate threat was neutralized, but as I stood there, the heartstone's light fading in my hand, I looked from the weeping Ryland to the stern, resolute Lysandra. The traitor was found, but his words echoed. The king is occupied, a fabricated border alarm. Kaelen was walking into a trap. And we had no way to warn him. The silence in the moon tower was deafening, broken only by Ryland's ragged sobs. The wave of power from the heartstone had left me feeling both drained and electrified. I had not fought with a blade but with memory, forcing Ryland to remember the man he was before the poison of his father's secret oath had claimed him. The cost of that remembrance was his entire world shattering around him. Lysandra moved with swift efficiency. She disarmed the surrendered guard and used his own belt to bind his hands. Her eyes, when they met mine, held a new respect. The stories were understated, she said simply, then her gaze turned grim. But we have no time. Ryland said the king is walking into an alarm. We must assume it's a larger ambush. How do we warn him? I asked, my voice shaky. He left hours ago for the southern caves. He won't have gone far, Lysandra said, her mind racing. The plan was to catch Ryland signaling his accomplices. Kaelen would have doubled back and hidden his main force nearby to intercept any messengers. He'll be in the Blackwood Glen, about an hour's hard ride southeast. It's a natural choke point. She looked at Ryland, who was now silent, staring blankly at the wall. He can tell us the specifics of their plan if he truly remembers himself. I knelt before the broken captain. He flinched as if I were a flame. Ryland, I said, not gently but firmly, you have remembered your oath to your king, now you must fulfill it. Where is the true ambush? How many? What is their aim? He looked at me, his eyes hollow. Not to capture, he mumbled, the words torn from him. To kill. The circle believes the king is lost, irredeemably tainted by your influence. The false alarm draws him to the glen. 20 archers, shadows all in the trees. They won't engage in combat. They'll fill the air with poison-tipped arrows from concealment. They mean to bring down the beast from a distance, like hunting a rabid animal. A fresh wave of agony crossed his face. I gave them the position of his lookout. 20 archers, poison, an attack designed for cowardice and maximum lethality. Cold fury, a feeling so foreign it burned, rose in my chest. They wouldn't just challenge him, they would murder him from the shadows. We have to go, I said, standing. Now, you cannot ride into an ambush, Lysandra stated. I am the one thing they do not expect. I shot back, my voice stronger than I felt. They plan for the beast, they do not plan for the keeper. The heartstone, it can do more than bring remorse. I felt it. It can clear the air. I think I can disrupt their focus, their aim. I didn't know if it was true, but I had to believe it. Lysandra assessed me for a long moment, then gave a sharp nod. Then we ride, you, me, and a handful of guards I know are loyal. We'll take the king's own warhorse for you. He's the fastest in the stable. Ryland, you will come with us. Your testimony may stay some of our own arrows. The ride to Blackwood Glen was a blur of pounding hooves and terror. The king's great black stallion, Onyx, was a creature of immense power and grace, and he seemed to sense the urgency, flying over the terrain. The forest closed in, the path narrowing into the gloomy glen, a deep ravine flanked by thick, overhanging cliffs and dense foliage. Perfect for an ambush, Lysandra signaled a halt just before the glen's entrance. We could hear nothing but the wind in the leaves, an ominous, waiting silence. They're already here, she whispered. The king's party should be just ahead, waiting in concealment for the messenger that will never come. But the shadows are above them. How do we find him? I asked, my hands slick on the reins. We don't find him, we draw the arrows to us, Ryland said, his voice hollow but resolved. It was a death wish, a penance. No, I said, the idea forming with sudden, chilling clarity. We don't draw them, we announce us. I looked at the heartstone, now secured in a pouch around my neck. Its gentle warmth was a constant presence. Kaelen senses me, my presence, my calm. What if I do the opposite? What if I send out a pulse of something else, not fear but a beacon, a shockwave of peace so loud it shakes the leaves they hide in? Lysandra stared at me. It could also warn the assassins. It will warn everyone, I said, but only Kaelen will know what it means. The shadows will be confused, he will be alerted, it might give him the moment he needs. Without waiting for permission, I closed my eyes, I gripped the heartstone through the leather of the pouch. I thought not of the quiet pool, but of the moment the stone had shown its power in the tower, a wave of forceful, undeniable truth. I thought of the sacred grove, of generations of keepers singing the forest to peace. I gathered every ounce of my will, my fear for Kaelen, my rage at the shadows, and my desperate hope, and I channeled it all into a single, silent command to the stone: reveal them. I pushed. A soundless, visible ring of silver light exploded from me. It wasn't bright like the sun, it was like moonlight made solid, a shimmering wave that expanded outward in all directions, passing through trees and rock without harm. But where it touched living beings, it left a faint, glowing echo for just a second. And in the cliffs above, 20 hidden archers, their hearts filled with malice, were suddenly outlined in faint, ghostly silver against the dark foliage. The glen erupted. A roar of pure, unleashed fury split the air, the beast, now aware of the killers above him. From our position, we saw Kaelen and his men burst from their concealment below, not as sitting targets, but as a whirlwind of retaliation. Arrows rained down, but they were hurried, panicked shots, most going wild. Now, Lysandra yelled, and we charged into the glen. What followed was not a battle, but a brutal revelation. The shadowed ones, exposed, were skilled but not prepared for a direct fight with enraged royal guards and the Alpha King himself. Kaelen had shifted. The great black wolf was a creature of nightmare, moving with impossible speed, leaping up the rocky slopes to drag archers from their perches. But I saw one archer, calmer than the rest, take careful aim from a high ledge. His arrow, glistening with a sickly green toxin, was leveled at the wolf's exposed flank. I didn't think. I kicked Onyx forward, raising the heartstone high. I didn't try to send a wave this time. I focused on the archer, on his cold, focused hatred, and I poured a beam of pure, pacifying energy directly at him. It was like dousing a flame with water. His focused intent shattered. His hands trembled. The arrow loosed, but it went harmlessly wide, clattering against rocks. The archer looked at me, his eyes wide with a terror different from that of facing the beast. It was the terror of the void facing light. He turned and fled. The skirmish was over in minutes. The surviving shadows melted away, their ambush a complete failure. Kaelen shifted back, his body heaving with adrenaline and rage, his skin marred by a few shallow cuts. His silver eyes scanned the glen, landing on me, sitting astride his own warhorse, the heartstone still glowing softly in my raised hand. He strode over, his expression unreadable. He looked from me to Lysandra, to the bound and broken Rylan being guarded by his men, and then back to me. "You were supposed to be safe in the tower," he said, his voice a low growl. "The tower was compromised," I replied, my own bravery finally faltering now that he was safe. "The trap it was for you, poison arrows." "I know," he said. He reached up and placed a hand over mine, which still clutched the stone. The connection was instant, a surge of his raw, stormy power meeting the deep, calming resonance of the heartstone through me. It was dizzying, a perfect, potent equilibrium. "I felt your signal. It was like a bell ringing in the heart of the storm. It showed me everything." He didn't thank me, he didn't need to. The look in his eyes said it all, awe, respect, and a profound, unshakable bond that had just been forged in fire and moonlight. He had faced the coward's ambush and survived, but more importantly, the Luna had not waited to be protected. She had ridden to war, armed with a different kind of power, and saved her king. "The shadowed ones are not just a secret order," Kaelen said, his gaze turning to the dark woods where they had fled. "They are a cancer within the kingdom itself. And today we have begun to cut it out. He looked at Rylan and there was pity there but no forgiveness. Take him back, his fate will be decided later. For now, we return to Stonehaven. The game has changed, we are no longer prey waiting in the tower. We are the hunters, and we have their scent. The mood in Stonehaven upon our return was a strange alloy of triumph and tension. The story of the failed ambush spread in hushed, exaggerated tones of the Luna's mystical light revealing hidden assassins of the king's ferocity of Captain Ryland's shocking betrayal. The court was a hive of nervous energy. Torvin and his faction were conspicuously quiet, their bluster replaced by a wary, calculating silence. The unmasking of a shadowed one so close to the throne was a shock that silenced all but the most foolish critics. Rylan was imprisoned in the deep dungeons, not for execution, but for interrogation and, perhaps, redemption. Under the combined influence of my careful questioning and the heartstone's clarifying presence, he unspooled a tragic tapestry. His father had been inducted into the Thorned Circle as a young man, believing he was joining an elite guard for the purity of the Alpha line. The oath was one of secrecy and action against softening influences. Rylan had been groomed since childhood, his loyalty to Kaelen genuine but always secondary to this deeper, shadow oath he'd sworn on his father's deathbed. The order had been dormant for years, only reactivating when Kaelen recognized me. I was the catalyst. The Beast's perceived softening was their call to arms. They have a leader, Rylan confessed, his voice flat from exhaustion and truth, a figure they call the Thorned King. None of us have ever seen his face. Commands come through dead drops and sealed messages. Their goal was never just to kill you, Anna. It was to discredit you, to kill the king for being tainted, and to purge the kingdom of any memory of the Keeper's ways. They see it as a cleansing. With this intelligence, Kaelen began a quiet, ruthless purge of his own. Guards, officials, even a minor lord were discreetly removed, their connections to the circle uncovered through Ryland's information and financial trails Lysandra expertly followed. The fortress was being secured from within. But a new resolution was hardening in me, born from the battle in the glen and the words of Seleni's diary. One evening, as we sat in the solar, the heartstone now openly resting on the table between us, its light a gentle contributor to the candlelight, I spoke my mind. We are playing a defensive game, I said, rooting out shadows, shoring up walls. It is necessary, but it is not enough. Kaelen looked up from a report. What would you have us do? We must rebuild, I said, the words feeling monumental as I said them. Not just a court, but a legacy. Selene wrote that the heartstone is the key, but it needs its home. We must rebuild the temple of the moon's mercy. He leaned back, his expression thoughtful. It is a ruin in the middle of the whispering woods. It would be a massive undertaking, a clear target for our enemies. It would also be a clear statement, I countered, passion threading my voice. It would say that the Keeper's way, the way of healing, of balance, of peace that does not mean weakness, is returned. It would give hope to those who have felt the harshness of a kingdom without mercy. And I reached out, my fingers hovering over the stone. I think it is what the stone wants. I feel it yearning. He was silent for a long time, studying the swirling silver depths of the heartstone. A king builds forts and roads, he mused. A king secures borders and collects taxes, but a legacy is built on symbols that outlast stone. My legacy has been the strength of the beast. Perhaps it is time to build a second legacy, the strength of the heart. He nodded, a decisive royal gesture. We will rebuild the temple. The project began in secret. Kaelen commissioned the most trusted stonemasons and woodworkers from a distant, loyal pack, bringing them to Stonehaven under the guise of repairing the keep's own granaries. Lysandra managed the logistics with terrifying competence. My role was that of architect and visionary, guided by the visions from my dreams and the detailed descriptions in Selene's diary. We traveled to the temple site frequently, with heavy guards. The first time I stood in the overgrown clearing, amidst the moss-covered foundations and the few jagged crystal pillars that still reached for the sky, the sorrow was a physical ache. But beneath the sorrow was a thrilling, resonant hum. The heartstone in my pouch glowed in response to the place as if greeting an old friend. I walked the perimeter, the diary in my hand. Here was the reflecting pool, I said, pointing to a water-filled depression. The infirmary was there, open to the air and the moonlight. And the central sanctuary here. I stood on a large, circular dais of cracked blue stone. This was where the pedestal had been in my dream. As the workers began the painstaking task of clearing and repairing, I spent my days among them, not as a lady but as a guide. I found I had an instinct for it, where a wall should curve to catch the dawn light, where a channel for moonwater should run. The workers, initially skeptical of taking orders from an Omega, soon respected my unwavering vision and the way the heartstone would often pulse approvingly at a correct decision. One day, a grizzled old mason approached me. "Lady," he said, scratching his beard. "We found something in the foundation of the east wall." He held out a small, clay urn sealed with wax. It was intricately painted with crescent moons. With careful reverence, I broke the seal. Inside were not ashes, but scrolls. More of Cellini's writings, detailed herb lore, musical notations for the healing songs, diagrams for meditation under specific moon phases. It was a treasure trove of practical knowledge. The keepers had buried their wisdom, hoping one day it would be found. The discovery lit a fire in me. I began to study not just the diary, but the scrolls. In the evenings in the solar, instead of discussing court politics, I would share what I learned with Kaelen. I explained how certain harmonies could ease a wolf's shift rage, how a poultice of moonlight-blessed herbs could heal wounds that festered from dark magic. He listened, fascinated. "This is not a soft art," he remarked one night. "This is a deep science of the soul and the body." A different kind of strategy. The temple walls began to rise, pale stone that gleamed in the forest light. It was a slow, beautiful rebirth, but as the symbol of our new hope grew taller, the shadows it cast grew deeper. We discovered sabotage, tools went missing. A carefully laid foundation was found subtly misaligned one morning, as if shifted in the night. Then a watchman was found unconscious, a dart tipped with a sleep toxin in his neck. The thorned circle was not attacking head-on. They were gnawing at the edges, trying to delay, demoralize, and demonstrate that they could still reach us. The final provocation was a message nailed to the central dais with a dagger made of blackened thornwood. It read, "You build on sacred ground you have defiled. The thorned king will water his realm with the tears of the false keeper and the blood of the tainted beast." It was a declaration of war, not on the kingdom, but on the very idea we were trying to resurrect. Kaelen's face was granite as he read it. "They are scared," he said, his voice cold. "A symbol is just a symbol until it is filled with meaning. You are filling it with meaning, Anna, and that is a threat they cannot abide." He made a decision. "We will move the court." I stared at him. "What, for the final phase of construction and for the consecration," he explained, a strategic light in his eyes. "We will move the entire court, the guards, the staff, to a temporary camp here in the Whispering Woods. We will make the temple site the heart of the kingdom, if only for a season. It will accomplish 3 things. It will protect the workers with our full force, it will show the kingdom and our enemies the absolute priority of this project, and it will force the thorned circle to act in the open if they wish to stop us. We will draw them out to our chosen ground." It was a bold, unprecedented move, a king leaving his stone fortress for a woodland building site. The court was thrown into an uproar, but Kaelen's will was absolute. Within a week, a bustling, fortified camp surrounded the rising temple. Banners flew, the royal tent stood beside the half-built sanctuary, and I felt it. The moment I laid the heartstone in its rightful place on the newly carved pedestal in the central sanctuary, even under open sky with only the circle of columns around us, the entire clearing seemed to sigh. A wave of profound, gentle energy settled over the camp. Arguments died down. Restless sleep became deep. The very air felt easier to breathe. The temple was not yet complete, but its heart was beating again. And as we all slept under the stars, guarded by stone and loyalty, I knew the Thorned King was watching. We had laid our bait. The stage for the final confrontation was not a battlefield of mud and blood, but a sanctuary of moonlight and memory, and we were ready. Life in the woodland camp was a strange, suspended reality. The constant murmur of construction, the chip of chisel on stone, the groan of ropes lifting timbers became our new rhythm. The air smelled of fresh-cut pine, wet mortar, and the clean, energizing scent that emanated from the heartstone on its pedestal. The royal court, uprooted from its stone comforts, adapted with a mix of grumbling and awe. The stone's influence was undeniable. A pervasive calm hung over the tents, muting the usual petty squabbles and sharpening focus. My days were a whirlwind. Mornings were spent with the master builder, interpreting the diagrams from Seleni's scrolls. Afternoons, I worked in a temporary herbalist's tent Lysandra had erected, learning to identify and prepare the plants described in the texts: silverleaf for fever, moondust lichen for calming tremors, night-blooming jasmine for deep sleep. I was no expert, but under the guidance of an old Delta healer who had joined our camp, my hands were slowly learning the language of healing. Evenings were for the heartstone. As twilight deepened, I would sit before it on the dais, sometimes with Kaelen, often alone. I wasn't praying, I was listening. The stone communicated not in words, but in pulses of emotion and fleeting images, a sense of deep antiquity, the joy of healing, the sorrow of destruction, and now a growing, vigilant tension. It knew the enemy was near. One such evening, Kaelen joined me. He sat on the dais steps, his gaze on the darkening woods beyond the ring of torchlight. "The scouts report increased activity on the eastern tree line," he said quietly. "Signs of a large group moving with purpose but staying just out of sight. They're encircling us." "The Thorned King is gathering his thorns," I murmured, my palm resting on the cool surface of the stone. A faint image flashed in my mind, not wolves but men moving in a tight, silent ring, their faces obscured by woven thorn masks. They will attack soon. Under the new moon, when the night is darkest, he looked at me sharply. "The stone tells you this." "In a way," I said. "It feels their malice like a poison in the wind, and it knows its own power is tied to the moon. Its light is weakest when the moon is dark, that's when they'll come." Kaelen nodded, his strategic mind aligning with the mystical insight. "2 nights from now, good, we will be ready." He paused, his eyes on the heartstone. "What is your role to be when steel meets steel? You are not a warrior, Anna." "No," I agreed. "My battlefield is here, on this dais. Their goal is to shatter the stone and kill us. My role is to ensure the stone is not just a target, but a weapon. To use its song not just to calm, but to," I searched for the word from the scrolls, "to disenchant, to unravel the fanaticism that binds them." He placed a hand over mine on the stone. The familiar surge of connection, storm and sanctuary flowed between us. "Then I will hold the line," he vowed, his voice a low rumble, "so the song can be sung." The next day was a frenzy of covert preparation. Kaelen's forces were repositioned. The seemingly vulnerable camp was, in truth, a layered defense. The outer ring of guards were decoys. The true strength was concentrated in a second ring, hidden within the camp itself and among the half-built temple walls. The temple sanctuary where the heartstone sat was to be the final, unbreachable circle. I spent hours with Lysandra and the healer, preparing poultices and bandages, a grim but necessary task. On the day of the new moon, an eerie quiet settled over the woods. The birdsong ceased by mid-afternoon. The workers were dismissed early, sent back to a fortified section of camp with their families. As dusk bled into a starry, moonless night, the final defenses fell into place. I took my position on the dais, the heartstone before me. A contingent of Kaelen's most loyal, led by a grim-faced Lysandra, formed a living shield around the sanctuary's columns. We waited. The attack came not with a roar but with a whisper. One moment the forest edge was still. The next, dark figures streamed from the trees, silent as smoke. They wore mismatched armor, but each bore the Thornan skull tattoo or a crude version of it on their shields. Their faces were set in masks of zealous fury. The thorned circle had shown itself at last, the outer decoy ring engaged, the clash of steel shattering the silence. It was a brutal, chaotic melee in the dark, illuminated only by the guttering torches of the camp. The shadows fought with a desperate, disciplined ferocity, but Kaelen's strategy held. They pushed through the first line, only to be met by the hammer of the second, hidden force. The king himself was everywhere, a whirlwind of black fur and silver eyes in his wolf form, his roars directing the defense. But the shadows had a strategy, too. They were not trying to win the camp. Like a spear, a dedicated wedge of their fiercest fighters drove straight through the chaos, aiming directly for the temple sanctuary. Their goal was in sight, the soft glow of the heartstone on the dais and me beside it. Hold the line. Lysandra barked, her sword gleaming as she stepped forward to meet the first thorned warrior to breach the column line. The sanctuary became a small, violent world of its own. The air filled with the grunts of combat, the scent of blood and sweat overwhelming the stone's usual clean fragrance. I closed my eyes. I could not watch the fighting. I had to focus. I placed both hands on the heartstone. Its glow was indeed dimmer, a faint ember compared to its full moon radiance, but an ember could start a fire. I thought of Selene's songs, I thought of the lullaby from my dream, but this was not a time for a lullaby. This was a time for a clarion call. The scrolls spoke of a song of unraveling, a harmonic used not to soothe a single beast but to break a collective madness. I had never tried it, I didn't know the notes, so I sang the only truth I knew. I poured into the stone my memory of the temple's peace, my grandmother's kindness, Kaelen's burdened strength, the hope in a mason's eyes as he laid a true stone. I poured in my fear, my love for this fragile new legacy, and my white-hot refusal to let it be snuffed out by hatred. I didn't sing words, I sang a feeling, a single, pure, sustained note of remembrance. The heartstone awoke, the faint ember blazed. A column of pure, silvery light shot up from the dais into the black sky, a beacon in the dark night. It didn't burn, it illuminated. The light washed over the battling figures in the sanctuary. The effect on my guards was one of renewed vigor and clarity. But on the thorned warriors it was catastrophic. The zealous fury on their faces fractured into confusion. The man fighting Lysandra suddenly stumbled back, looking at his bloody sword as if he'd never seen it before. Another dropped his weapon, clutching his head. The woven thorn masks seemed to writhe under the light, not physically, but as if the lies they represented were being seared away. What are we doing?" One gasped, his voice ragged. "This is a place of peace," the song was working. It was forcing them to remember their own humanity, the truth before the poison, but the effort was draining me utterly. I felt as if I were pouring my very soul into the stone. The column of light began to flicker. I swayed on my knees. Through the blur of my fading vision, I saw him. A figure, taller than the rest, emerged from the tree line at the edge of the clearing. He did not run. He walked with a terrible, deliberate pace towards the sanctuary. He wore no helmet, only a crown of twisted, blackened thorns. His face was in shadow, but his eyes reflected the heartstone's dying light with a cold, empty hunger. The thorned king. He raised a bow, not at me, but at the heartstone itself. The arrowhead was not iron, it was a shard of obsidian, dark as the void. It was a tool of pure negation, designed to shatter magical essence. I tried to push more power into the stone to raise the light, but I was spent. The column guttered. The unraveling song faltered. The Thorned King drew the bowstring. A black shape, massive and furious, launched from the side. Kaelen, in his wolf form, intercepted the king's path, but the Thorned King was prepared. He shifted his aim in a blink and loosed. The obsidian arrow struck Kaelen in the shoulder as he lunged. A soundless explosion of dark energy erupted from the impact. Kaelen crashed to the ground, shifting back to his human form mid-fall. He did not move. A terrible, wrong darkness began to spread from the wound like ink in water against his skin. The Thorned King discarded the bow and drew a jagged thorn sword, walking toward the defenseless king. A scream tore from my throat, raw, primal, and full of a power I didn't know I possessed. It wasn't a song of unraveling, it was a cry of pure, protective denial. The heartstone, reacting to my utter desperation, did not emit light, it emitted a pulse. A visible, concentric ring of sonic force shimmering silver exploded from the dais. It passed over everyone without harming them, but when it hit the Thorned King, it stopped him in his tracks. His crown of thorns shattered, his cloak tore. For a second, his face was revealed, not a monster, but a man, older with familiar, bitter lines of disappointment and zealotry. A lord I vaguely recognized from the far northern marches, one who had always spoken against new ways. He snarled, the moment of revelation passing, and raised his sword for a killing blow on Kaelen. He never finished it. From the ground, Kaelen's hand shot up and grabbed the king's wrist. The dark corruption was crawling up his neck, but his silver eyes blazed with defiant will. With a roar of agony and effort, he snapped the Thorned King's wrist. The sword fell. Around us, the battle had ended. The thorned warriors, broken from their spell by the stone's final pulse, were being subdued or had fled. Lysandra stood over us, her sword pointed at the Thorned King's throat. I stumbled from the dais, collapsing at Kaelen's side. The obsidian shard was still in his shoulder, pulsing with vile energy. His breath came in ragged gasps. "Anna," he whispered. "Don't speak," I begged, tears streaming down my face. I looked at the heartstone, then at the wound. The scrolls, there had to be something. My mind, fogged with exhaustion, raced. Dark magic requires a counterbalance of pure, anchored light. The stone was light, I was the anchor. I placed one hand on Kaelen's chest over his heart. I placed the other back on the heartstone. I had no strength left for songs. I had only a plea: take my strength, use my life, heal him. I pushed the last shred of my consciousness, my love for this fierce, noble, burdened king, into the connection. The stone flared one last, brilliant time. The light did not explode outward. It flowed down my arm into Kaelen, targeting the crawling darkness. There was a hiss like water on hot coals. The obsidian shard glowed white-hot and then dissolved into ash. The inky darkness receded, fading from his skin. Color returned to his face, his breathing eased. The light from the stone died completely, returning to its faint, moonless glow. My vision tunneled to black. The last thing I felt was Kaelen's hand, warm and strong, closing over mine on his chest before I slipped into unconsciousness. I awoke to the smell of herbs and the soft glow of lamplight. I was in a bed in the royal tent, my body feeling as if it had been trampled by a herd of elk. Memories flooded back, the battle, the pulse, the darkness in Kaelen's wound. Panic seized me. I tried to sit up. A firm, gentle hand pushed me back against the pillows. Lysandra's face swam into view, her stern features softened by concern and something akin to reverence. "Easy, you've been asleep for 2 days, you drained yourself to the brink. Kaelen." I rasped, my throat parched. "Alive," she said, and the weight of the world lifted from my chest. "Healing. The poison is gone, thanks to you. He's been here, sitting by your side, until an hour ago when his council dragged him away to deal with the prisoners." She helped me sip some water. "The Thorned King is captured. His name is Lord Vorgan of the Frost Crag Pack, a purist who lost his mate and son in a border skirmish decades ago. He blamed the softness of the Keeper's peace for their deaths. His grief curdled into this. It was a tragedy that had birthed a monster. The knowledge brought no joy, only a deep, weary sadness. The stone, I asked, unharmed, dim but steady, it seems tired like you. As I regained my strength over the next day, the camp transformed. The victory was complete, with their king captured and their madness literally unraveled by the heartstone's song. The remaining shadowed ones surrendered or dissipated. The atmosphere was no longer one of siege, but of solemn celebration and hard work. Kaelen visited that evening. He moved stiffly, his shoulder heavily bandaged, but the lethal darkness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a warm, silver gleam. He didn't say anything at first. He simply stood by my bed, looking down at me, his expression unreadable. "You should be resting," I finally said, breaking the silence. "I am," he replied, a faint smile touching his lips. "Standing here, seeing you awake, is the most rest I've had in years." He pulled a chair close and sat, his movements careful. "You saved my life, you saved the kingdom, again." "We saved it," I corrected. "Your plan, your strength on the field," I just sang. "You just commanded the most powerful artifact our world has ever known with the power of your heart," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "You faced the embodiment of hatred and did not fight it with more hatred. You fought it with memory, with truth. That Anna is a power that makes my strength look like a child's tantrum." His words humbled me. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of the camp rebuilding. "What will you do with Vorgan?" I asked. "Justice must be served for the lives he took, for the treason he committed," Kaelen said, his kingly tone returning. "But it will be a public justice, not a secret purge, and before his sentence is carried out, he will be brought here, to the temple, to see what he tried to destroy completed." The message was clear. The new way would handle the old violence with transparency, and it would do so on its own ground. A week later, I was strong enough to walk. The temple was nearly finished. The final stones were being set, the crystal panes for the roof being carefully fitted into their frames. It was breathtaking, a symphony of pale stone and clear crystal, designed to catch and magnify every ray of moonlight. It felt both ancient and newborn. The day of the consecration arrived, coinciding with the first sliver of the waxing moon. The entire camp and envoys from every pack in Vargin gathered in the clearing. Before the ceremony, a somber proceeding took place. Lord Vorgan, broken of spirit and shackled, was brought before the steps of the temple. Kaelen, in his full regalia, stood before him, with me at his side. "You sought to destroy a legacy of healing out of a belief that strength is only found in hardness," Kaelen proclaimed, his voice carrying to all. "Look upon what your hatred wrought and what love has rebuilt. Your sentence is death, but your lesson will live on. May the moon have mercy on your soul, for your kingdom showed you none." Vorgan said nothing. He merely stared at the temple, his eyes empty. As he was led away, I felt a pang. The keeper's way had failed to reach him in time. Some wounds, it seemed, were too deep to heal. Then it was time. Dressed in a simple gown the color of moonlight, I walked into the completed temple. The interior was more magnificent than I had dreamed. Moonlight, even the sliver, streamed through the crystal roof, fracturing into rainbows on the polished floor. In the center, on its ornate pedestal, sat the heartstone. It glowed with a gentle, waiting light. The crowd filtered in, filling the circular space. Kaelen stood to the right of the dais, representing the strength of the Alpha, the protector. I stood before the stone, representing the heart of the Omega, the healer. I turned to face the assembly, my people, my pack. "For generations, we believed strength was one thing," I began, my voice clear and steady in the sacred acoustics of the space. "We believed it was the claw, the fang, the unstoppable storm. We called it the beast, and we revered it. And that strength is real, and it is necessary." I glanced at Kaelen, who gave a slight, regal nod. "But it is only half of a whole. My ancestors, the keepers of the moon's mercy, knew the other half. The strength of the deep root that holds the tree firm in the gale, the strength of the still water that reflects the truth. the strength that heals, that soothes, that remembers. This temple is not a monument to weakness, it is a forge for a different kind of strength. A complete strength. I placed my hands on the heartstone. With this stone, the heart of our old legacy, and with the will of our king, the strength of our present, we consecrate this temple. May it stand as a beacon of balance. For the wounded soldier and the anxious child, for the Alpha burdened by rage and the Omega seeking purpose, this is a place of remembrance. Remember who you are beneath the fury. Remember the peace that is your birthright. I closed my eyes and sang. Not the unraveling song, nor the desperate cry. I sang the simple lullaby from my dream, the one Selene had used, a melody of winding streams and settling dusk. As I sang, the sliver of moon outside seemed to brighten. A beam of concentrated moonlight speared through the crystal roof and struck the heartstone. It erupted in light, a gentle, all-encompassing, loving light that filled every corner of the temple, washing over every person present. I felt aches I didn't know I had ease. I saw warriors' hard faces soften with released tension. I saw tears of relief in the eyes of Omegas and Deltas. The very stones of the temple hummed in harmony. The light condensed, flowing from the stone up the moonbeam and then showering back down like gentle, silver rain before fading. The heartstone's glow was now steady, strong, and eternal, a miniature moon held in stone. The ceremony was over. A new era had begun. Later, as the crowd mingled in awe outside, Kaelen and I stood alone in the sanctuary. The silence was profound and peaceful. They will tell stories of this day, Kaelen said softly, of the Omega who healed the beast and the beast who kneeled to crown a new world. It's not my crown, I said, looking at the stone. It's ours, a crown of two legacies woven together. He turned to me, and in the stone's soft light, his silver eyes were as clear and deep as a mountain lake. Then rule with me, Anna. Not from a shadowed throne, but from this place of light. Be my Luna in truth, not because a king commanded it, but because a kingdom needs both its heart and its sword. He wasn't asking for a political alliance or a fated bond. He was offering a partnership forged in trust, tested in fire, and consecrated in moonlight. He was offering a shared rule, a shared legacy. I looked at the heartstone, at the temple we had built, and at the king who had knelt to an Omega and in doing so had stood taller than ever before. I placed my hand in his. Yes, I said. And it was the easiest, most true word I had ever spoken. The world did not magically transform overnight. Prejudice, fear, and the inertia of old ways are stones not easily moved. But the consecration of the temple of the moon's mercy was a lever placed beneath those stones. Change, slow and undeniable, began. Kaelen and I divided our time between Stonehaven and the temple. Stonehaven remained the administrative heart, the fortress, but the temple in the Whispering Woods became the spiritual and judicial heart. It was there we held the most sensitive courts, disputes between pacts, petitions for clemency, cases of deep-seated trauma. The calming influence of the heartstone made truth-speaking easier and posturing harder. My first official act as Luna was to establish the Keeper's Guild. Using Selene's scrolls as foundational texts, we sought out Omegas and even a few Betas with an innate sensitivity, a healer's touch, or a singer's true voice. Under the guidance of the old Delta healer, Master Fenris, and with my direct oversight, they began to train. They learned herb lore, healing harmonies, and the meditative practices to ground themselves. They were not to be subservient to alphas, but complementary, a recognized, respected profession within the pack structure. The first test of the new order came from an unexpected quarter. A delegation from the eastern clans, the very ones Torvin had wanted to crush, arrived at the temple. Their alpha, a wary man named Jerk, had heard wild tales of the Moon Witch and the tamed beast. He came not to pledge fealty, but to seek aid. Our lands are sick, Jerk stated bluntly in the temple sanctuary, eyeing the heartstone with a mix of suspicion and hope. A blight kills the crops, a malaise saps the strength of our people. Our own healers are powerless. We have disagreements with your borders, King Kaelen. But our people are suffering. We heard this place offers a different kind of help. It was a diplomatic tightrope. Helping a potential rival could strengthen them. Refusing would validate every harsh claim about our old ways. Kaelen looked to me. This was my domain, I addressed Jerk. The moon's mercy does not recognize borders, Alpha Jerk. It recognizes need. We will send 2 of our novice keepers and Master Fenris with you. They will assess the blight and the malaise. They go under a banner of healing, not politics. In return, we ask for open passage and your oath that they will be safe. It was a gamble, sending our fledgling guild into uncertain territory, but it was the principle in action. Jerk, taken aback by the immediate no-strings offer, agreed. The keepers returned a moon later, exhausted but triumphant. The blight was a fungal rot exacerbated by tainted water. The malaise was a collective despair from years of hard living and conflict. The keepers used purifying songs on the water sources and simple group harmony sessions to lift spirits. They didn't solve everything, but they planted seeds of health and hope. The reports they brought back also gave us invaluable, peaceful insight into the Eastern clans' true strengths and struggles. Jerk sent a formal tribute of thanks, not weapons, but rare healing herbs unique to his mountains. The first bridge was built, not with a treaty of force, but with an act of compassion. Not all was smooth. Lord Torvin, though his faction had crumbled, remained a sullen, disapproving presence at court. He watched the Keepers' Guild with unveiled contempt. One afternoon, he confronted me directly in a Stonehaven courtyard as I reviewed a shipment of medicinal supplies. "You turn our warriors into gardeners and our omegas into minstrels," he scoffed. "You weaken the very fiber of what makes a wolf strong." I was no longer the kitchen maid who shrank from his gaze. I met his eyes, channeling the calm certainty the heartstone had taught me. "Lord Torvin, what is the strength of a pack? Is it only in the sharpness of its fangs? Or is it also in the health of its pups, the soundness of its elders' minds, the fertility of its land? A sword cannot harvest grain. Fury cannot heal a sick child. We are not dulling our fangs. We are ensuring the body those fangs are attached to is strong, healthy, and united. That is the true fiber of a pack. Anything less is just brittle." He had no rebuttal. He simply stared, and for the first time I saw not just arrogance in his eyes, but the flicker of a dawning, uncomfortable realization that the world had moved on, and he was being left behind in its dust. The personal journey between Kaelen and me deepened in quiet ways. Our bond was not a passionate, all-consuming fire, but a steady, warming hearth. We spent evenings reading together, sometimes discussing statecraft, sometimes in comfortable silence. He taught me the basics of swordplay, not to fight, he said, but to understand the warrior's mind and to have a last resort. I taught him the beginner's meditations, which he practiced with a seriousness usually reserved for war councils. One night, under a full moon at the temple, we stood on the dais. The heartstone glowed brilliantly, bathing the sanctuary in ethereal light. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked quietly. The uncomplicated fury, the time when strength was just about being the most fearsome beast, he considered this, his profile sharp in the silver light. "No," he said finally, "it was a prison, a magnificent, powerful prison, but a prison all the same. I was a weapon pointed by my own rage. Now," he looked at me, his eyes soft, "now I am a king with a partner, with a purpose beyond the next battle. I am free, in a way I never was when I was uncomplicated." His words filled a space in my soul I hadn't known was empty. We had freed each other. A year passed. The Keepers' Guild had dozens of members, their gray and silver robes becoming a common and welcome sight across Vargin. The temple was a thriving center of learning and peace. The kingdom was stable, its borders secure not just through might, but through growing alliances forged by aid and understanding. We were in the Stonehaven Solar, reviewing plans for a new school adjacent to the temple, when Lysandra entered, a peculiar expression on her face. "My king, my Luna. There is a petitioner at the temple gates. You will want to see this for yourselves." We exchanged a glance and rode out immediately. At the temple's grand entrance, a crowd had gathered. In the center, kneeling in the dust, was a figure in travel-stained robes. As we dismounted, the figure looked up. It was Rylan. He was thinner, older, his eyes haunted but clear. He had served his time in the dungeons, not with hard labor, but with intensive study of the Keeper's scrolls, a rehabilitation of the mind Kaelen had ordered. He placed a worn, familiar object on the ground before him, the thorn knot clasped from the cloak of the shadowed one he'd met a lifetime ago. "My king, my Luna," he said, his voice rough but steady, "I have no right to ask anything. But I have spent a year remembering the man I was before the poison. I have studied the ways I helped destroy. I ask for no pardon. I ask only for a chance to atone. Let me serve the legacy I tried to erase. Let me guard this temple. Let my watchfulness, which was once turned to evil, be turned to its protection. I ask for nothing more." The silence was heavy. This was the man whose betrayal had nearly gotten us killed. But he was also the man whose remorse had been genuine, whose mind had been a battlefield he'd lost. I looked at Kaelen. This was his former friend, his betrayer. The decision had to be his, but as Luna, my counsel mattered. Kaelen's jaw worked. He looked from Ryland's pleading face to the temple, to the heartstone glowing within, and finally to me. "The Temple of the Moon's Mercy," he said, his voice echoing in the clearing, "is founded on the principle of redemption. On the belief that no heart is so dark it cannot remember the light." He stepped forward. "Your service will be accepted, Rylan, but not as a guard. You will start as a groundskeeper. You will tend the gardens, clean the stones, and in your labor you will learn the value of what grows and what is built. Your atonement will be in sweat and humility, under the eyes of the heartstone and the Luna you once sought to destroy. Do you accept?" Tears streamed down Ryland's weathered face. He pressed his forehead to the dust. "I accept. With all that I am, I accept." As he was led away to begin his new life, I slipped my hand into Kaelen's. We had faced the beast within and without, the traitor in the dark, and the skepticism of our own people. We had built something from ashes. Now we had offered a hand to one of those who had lit the fire. The circle was not just complete, it was expanding, weaving a new story for Vargin, one of strength tempered by mercy, of a beast who found his heart, and an Omega who discovered she was the kingdom's soul. And we would rule it together under the watchful light of the moon. Peace, I learned, was not a static condition. It was a living thing that required tending, like the herb gardens now flourishing around the temple. The days settled into a fulfilling rhythm, but the heartstone began to behave strangely. Its light, usually a constant, gentle glow, would sometimes pulse erratically. During a healing session with a veteran suffering from shift rage, the stone flared so brightly it momentarily stunned everyone in the sanctuary, including the patient. At other times, its light would dim to near invisibility for hours, regardless of the moon's phase. A low, harmonic hum, audible only to me and the most sensitive keepers, thrummed from it at odd intervals like a distant bell tolling. Master Fenris was concerned. "The stone is an amplifier and a reservoir," he mused, his wrinkled hands hovering over it without touching. "For a year it has been absorbing the new peace of this place, the prayers, the healed trauma, but perhaps it is also remembering its own past traumas or sensing something we cannot." His words sparked a deep unease in me. I spent more and more time at the stone's pedestal, not in formal meditation but in open listening. The images it sent were fragmented and disturbing, not of the temple's destruction but of a time before. A vast, bustling complex of learning, hundreds of keepers in silver robes, and at its center a heartstone 10 times the size of ours throbbing with power. Then a cataclysmic fracture. the great stone shattering into fragments. Our stone was just one piece. The hum was a call. It was looking for its other parts. I brought my fears to Kaelen. We sat in the temple library, scrolls of ancient geography spread before us. The legends say the original heartstone was a gift from the moon spirit itself, I said, tracing a faded map. It was the source of all the keepers' power. When the purges began, the head keeper, Seleni's grandmother, perhaps shattered it to keep its power from being corrupted or seized. The fragments were scattered and hidden. And now that ours is active and strong, Kaelen deduced, his strategist's mind engaging, it's resonating with the others, calling them, or being called by something else. That was the terrifying possibility. If our stone could amplify healing, what could a corrupted fragment amplify? Hatred, madness. The thought of a dark mirror to our temple, powered by a shard of the same sacred source, was a chilling prospect. The decision was agonizing but inevitable. We could not sit and wait for an unknown threat to coalesce around a powerful artifact. We had to find the other fragments first. Preparations were made in utter secrecy. This was not a state mission, it was a pilgrimage. I would go, accompanied only by Lysandra, two of the most spiritually advanced keepers, Anya and Pell, and a minimal guard disguised as merchants. Kaelen had to remain. His visible presence was necessary to maintain stability and deter any opportunistic moves from the likes of Torvin. Our public story was that the Luna was undertaking a prolonged meditation in the deepest part of the Whispering Woods. The night before my departure, we stood together in the sanctuary. The stone's hum was particularly strong, a vibration in the soles of my feet. "You will take a piece of my guard with you," Kaelen said, his voice tight with controlled worry. He unclasped the silver wolf's head brooch from his cloak, a symbol of his personal authority. "Show this in my name if you must, but your true protection," he placed a hand over the heartstone, then over my heart, "is in here, trust it, and come back to me." The journey was long and moved us far beyond the borders of Vargin. The stone was our compass. I would hold it during our rests, and a clear, directional pull would guide our next steps, a sensation like a silken thread tugging from the chest. We traveled through independent pack territories and neutral human towns, our disguises holding. The strain of constant travel and the weight of the quest wore on us all, but the stone's energy, though agitated, seemed to sustain me. We were led into the harsh, rocky foothills of the Dragon Spine Mountains, a desolate place of sharp winds and little life. The pull became an insistent, almost painful throb. Following it, we found a cave entrance hidden by a landslide. The air that wafted from it was not damp and cold, but dry, warm, and carried a faint, acrid scent. Lysandra lit a torch. "This feels wrong," she muttered, her sword already loose in its scabbard. We ventured in. The cave opened into a vast natural cavern, and in the center, on a crude altar of black rock, sat another fragment of the heartstone, but it was wrong. Our stone swirled with silver and blue. This one was a sickly, bruised purple, shot through with veins of black. It emitted no light, but rather seemed to suck the illumination from the torch, casting long, distorted shadows. Around the altar were the remains of a crude camp, rotting supplies, a cold fire pit, and bodies. 3 of them desiccated, their faces frozen in expressions of agony and ecstasy. They wore tattered robes, but one clutched a medallion bearing the Thornanskull symbol. "The shadowed ones were here," Anya whispered, horrified. "They found a fragment, they tried to use it. They corrupted it," Pell said, his voice hollow, "or it corrupted them." The purple stone pulsed. A wave of nausea and disjointed, angry whispers washed over my mind. I clutched our true heartstone, its light flaring in defensive response, pushing back the mental assault. "We have to take it," I said, though the idea revolted me. "We can't leave this power here, we must try to cleanse it." As I stepped toward the altar, a figure detached itself from the shadows behind the stone. It was a man, emaciated, his eyes glowing with the same sickly purple light as the fragment. He was the lone survivor, driven mad by prolonged exposure. Mine, he rasped, his voice like grinding stones. The glorious pain, the true power, you can't have it. He lunged, not with a weapon, but with clawed hands, his mind clearly shattered. Lysandra moved to intercept, but I held up a hand. This was a sickness of the spirit, not a foe for a blade. I raised our heartstone and did the only thing I could think of. I didn't attack, I offered a memory. I poured into our stone the image of the temple at peace. The feeling of the moonlight on the dais, the sound of the healing lullaby, the look on a veteran's face when the rage left him. A beam of pure silver light shot from our stone and struck the corrupted fragment. The madman screamed, recoiling. The purple stone shuddered. For a moment the black veins receded and a hint of silver blue flickered at its core. But then the purple surged back, stronger, and a backlash of violent, hateful energy exploded from it. The force threw us all backwards. The cavern trembled, dust and rock showering down. The corrupted fragment shot a jagged bolt of dark energy directly at me. Our heartstone, still in my hand, reacted instinctively. It didn't deflect the bolt, it absorbed it. A shockwave of conflicting energies, pure light and corrupted darkness, ripped through me. I felt like a vessel about to shatter. The world went white, then black. I heard Lysandra shouting, the madman's dying wail, and then the deep, resonant crack of stone. When my vision cleared, I was on the ground, my body buzzing with pain. Lysandra was helping me up. The madman lay dead, his eyes empty. On the altar, the corrupted fragment was gone. In its place was a small pile of inert gray dust, and in my hand our heartstone had changed. A single, hair-thin vein of black now marred its interior, cutting through the swirling silver like a crack in the sky. It still glowed, but the light was fiercer, more turbulent. The gentle warmth was now a hot, restless pulse. It had absorbed the corruption to save me and had been stained by it. The cost of our mission was clear. We had prevented a dark fragment from falling into worse hands, but we had damaged our own greatest treasure in the process. The harmonious song within it was now a dissonant chord. We had found an echo in the stone, and it was an echo of pain that had left a scar. The journey back to Vargin was a somber one. The stone's new, unstable energy was a constant concern. It would sometimes flare with aggressive light, startling animals and making my companions uneasy. Other times, the black vein would seem to expand, and a deep chill would emanate from it, followed by whispers of the madman's anguish in my mind. We arrived at the temple under the cover of a stormy night. Kaelen was waiting, his face etched with lines of worry that deepened when he saw the altered stone. I told him everything in the privacy of the sanctuary. When I finished, he stared at the stone, the thin black line like a fault in our world. We contained one threat, he said quietly, and brought another into our very heart. He took my hands, they were cold. The scar is not just in the stone, Anna. It is in you, I can feel it. He was right. A sliver of the corruption's chill had taken root in my spirit, a shadow on the edge of my own inner light. The Omega, who had been a wellspring of calm, now knew what it was to hold a fragment of chaos. The question hung in the sacred air, more daunting than any army. How do you heal a wounded god? The temple, once a place of effortless serenity, now felt like a patient in a fragile recovery. The heartstone's light still filled the sanctuary, but its rhythm was off, a heartbeat with a worrying murmur. The thin black vein seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a dormant infection. The effect on me was subtle but profound. My sleep, once dreamless and deep, was now invaded by fragments of the madman's memories, the addictive rush of the corrupted stone's power, the crushing despair when it receded, the paranoid hatred for anything pure. I would wake with a gasp, my own hands feeling alien. During the day, moments of frustration, a stubborn lord in council, a failed poultice, would spark a flash of surprising, hot anger that was wholly foreign to my nature. I would clamp down on it instantly, but the aftertaste of it frightened me. Kaelen saw it all. His alpha senses, so attuned to me, picked up the discordant notes in my scent, the slight tension in my posture that never fully eased. He was patient, endlessly so, but I saw the helpless worry in his eyes. He could fight any tangible enemy, but this was a battle within the very symbols of our reign. Master Fenris and the senior keepers convened. They studied the stone for days, using every technique from the scrolls. They tried harmonies of cleansing, herbs of purification, and focused meditations. The black vein would sometimes recede slightly under these efforts, only to darken again when they stopped. It was as if the corruption was not just a stain, but a living, resistant entity. It is a spiritual parasite, Fenris concluded, his face grave. It feeds on the stone's light, twisting it. Our methods are like trying to wash away ink with water. We dilute it momentarily, but the stain remains. We need a solvent, a power of equal but opposite nature to the corruption, not just gentle cleansing. Where do we find such a thing? I asked, my voice sounding tired even to my own ears. The corruption was born of hatred, greed, and madness, fueled by the shadowed one's zeal, Anya, one of the keepers who had been on the journey, suggested. Its opposite would be a power of pure, selfless sacrifice. Or perhaps a love so unconditional it has no shadow, but such a thing is a feeling, not a tool. A feeling. The answer, as it often was, lay not in external magic but in the heart, and my heart was currently compromised. The political repercussions began to ripple outwards. The stone's instability affected the temple's ambient energy. Where once visitors left feeling uplifted, some now reported strange dreams or unexplained anxieties after visiting. Rumors, stoked by Torvin's remaining sympathizers, began to circulate. The Omega's power is flawed. The beast's weakness has infected the very stone. The temple is cursed. Then the first true crisis hit. A young alpha from a western pack, brought to the temple to heal a severe case of shift rage that made him a danger to his family, was placed in the sanctuary for a session. I was leading the harmony, focusing through my own internal fog. As we reached the crucial moment of calming, the black vein in the heartstone flared. Instead of a wave of peace, a jagged burst of conflicting energy, soothing light and aggressive dark, washed over the young alpha. He screamed not in rage but in terror and confusion, and his shift, instead of being soothed, was violently triggered mid-transformation, leaving him trapped in a painful half-wolf state. It took Master Fenris and 3 other keepers hours to stabilize him with traditional herbs, their musical magic now too risky to use. The failure was a public, devastating blow. The boy's family, initially hopeful, left in bitter disappointment. The story spread like wildfire. The Keepers Guild's credibility, so carefully built, teetered. That night, in the depths of my shame and fear, I avoided the sanctuary. I walked the moonlit gardens, the weight of my crown feeling like lead. Rylan, now tending the night-blooming jasmine, saw me. He had become a silent, penitent fixture, his work meticulous. "You carry the scar because you took the blow meant for others, Luna," he said, his voice low, not looking up from his work. "I know something of carrying scars for past sins. The scar is not the failure. Hiding from it is." His words, simple and born of hard-earned wisdom, struck me. I had been treating the corruption as my shameful secret, a flaw to be concealed and fixed. But it was a battle wound, earned in defense of our legacy. I went to Kaelen. He was in the map room, staring unseeingly at a parchment. The stress of the past weeks was etched on his face. "I have been approaching this wrong," I said, my resolve firming. "I've been trying to quiet the dissonance, to go back to how things were, but we can't. The stone isn't pure anymore, and neither am I." I took a deep breath. "The corruption is part of it now, part of me. We cannot reject it. We must integrate it, understand it, use its energy, not fight it." He looked at me, his silver eyes searching. "How? The shadow knows light," I said, the idea forming as I spoke. "The madness knew sanity, that's why it hated it so much. The stone absorbed that shadow. I need to do the same with the peace inside me. I need to sit with it. Not as a healer trying to cure a patient, but as a listener, to hear its story, to acknowledge its pain. Only then can it possibly be transformed. It was a dangerous idea. Delving into the corruption could mean being consumed by it. Kaelen's expression showed he knew the risk, but he also saw the determined light back in my eyes, the first true spark he'd seen since my return. "You will not do it alone," he stated. "I will be there, not in the way of the meditation, but as your anchor." The beast may not understand subtle magic, but it knows how to guard its heart. If the shadow threatens to pull you under, I will pull you back. We prepared in the sanctuary at dawn, the time of balance between night and day. The keepers formed a wide circle around the dais, not to sing, but to hold a collective intention of steadfastness. Master Fenris prepared strong stimulant herbs in case I needed to be forcibly roused. Lysandra stood guard at the door, her face grim. I sat before the heartstone, Kaelen behind me, his hands resting firmly on my shoulders, a physical tether to the present. I looked at the black vein. Instead of fear, I allowed a feeling of pity for it. It was a wound, too. I closed my eyes and dropped my defenses. I stopped pushing the disturbing feelings away. I invited them in. It was a torrent. The madman's grief over a lost family twisted into blame. The shadowed one's perverted sense of righteous purification, the addictive, sickening power of the corrupted fragment. The loneliness, the fear, the all-consuming anger. It was a hurricane of negative emotion. I did not fight it. I let it rage through the corridors of my mind. I observed it. "I see your pain," I thought into the storm. "I see your loneliness. Your belief that you were making strength." The storm seemed to pause, surprised at being seen, not judged. I showed it my memories in return. The kitchen, the loneliness there, the fear when Kaelen first called me forward, the weight of the crown, my own doubts. "We are not so different," I whispered in my soul. "We both know what it is to be afraid, to be hurt." Then I offered it the strongest memories I had, Kaelen kneeling, the temple rising, the veterans' tears of relief, the Eastern clan's gratitude. "This is what the light builds," I showed it, not weakness, connection, a different kind of strength. The corrupt energy swirled, confused. It was used to being fought, to causing fear. Compassion was a language it didn't speak. I felt Kaelen's grip tighten on my shoulders, his presence a solid rock in the psychic maelstrom. I focused on that anchor, on the love and trust it represented. Slowly, painfully, I began to gently channel the storm, not to expel it but to guide its furious energy. To transmute its hatred into determination, its fear into vigilance, its addictive rush into unwavering commitment. It was an exhausting, soul-wrenching process. Sweat soaked my robes. I trembled with the effort, but I held on. When I finally opened my eyes, hours had passed. The sanctuary was silent, the keepers watching in hushed awe. The heartstone still glowed on its pedestal. The black vein was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer a jagged, invasive crack. It had softened, blurred at the edges, and was now threaded with filaments of silver, as if the light was weaving itself through the darkness, integrating it. The stone's pulse was steady again, but different, stronger, more resilient, with a deeper, more complex harmony. It had the steadfastness of bedrock that has withstood an earthquake. I looked up at Kaelen. His face was pale with worry, but his eyes shone. "It's not gone," I said, my voice hoarse, "but it's not a sickness anymore. It's a remembrance, a warning and a strength." The stone has healed, not by returning to what it was, but by becoming something new. I had faced the fracture within, and in acknowledging it, had made us both whole. The temple's heart beat again, not with a naive purity, but with the hard-won wisdom of a survivor. Our reign was no longer a pristine dream. It was a lived-in, scarred, and ultimately unbreakable reality. The transformation of the heartstone was not just internal. The very air of the temple changed. The lingering anxiety evaporated, replaced by a profound, grounded peace that felt earned rather than gifted. It was the difference between the calm of a sheltered pond and the deep, still strength of an ancient lake. Visitors now spoke of leaving with a sense of resilience, of being equipped to face their own shadows. My own integration of the experience was ongoing. The flashes of anger were gone, replaced by a sharper, more compassionate understanding of darkness. I could look at a resentful lord like Torvin and see not just an adversary, but a man clinging to a familiar pain because he feared the uncertainty of healing. This new perspective shaped my next ambition. The Keeper's Guild was a success within Vargin, but the vision from the stone, the vast, interconnected network of keepers from the ancient past, lingered in my mind. We were one fragment, healed and strong. Were there others out there, lost or hidden? Were there pockets of the old knowledge surviving in secret? I proposed a gathering, the Council of Roots and Stone. We would send envoys to every corner of the known world, to every pack, clan, and independent settlement, not to proselytize, but to invite. We would invite healers, wise ones, lore keepers, and those who felt the old call of the moon in their blood to come to the temple, to share knowledge, to see if the shattered legacy could be reconnected not by force, but by shared purpose. Kaelen embraced the idea fully. A king rules territory, he said. An empire builds roads, but a legacy, it builds connections. Let us see what roots still live beneath the ash. The invitations went out, carried by swift riders and trusted sea captains. The response was slow and mixed. From some there was suspicious silence, from others cautious curiosity, but from a few there was eager, almost desperate hope. Months later they began to arrive. It was a trickle at first, then a steady stream. An old human herb witch from the southern marshes, whose people had oral tales of moon-touched women who could sing fevers away. A pair of brother and sister omegas from a distant island pack who had independently rediscovered simple healing harmonies. A stern, practical beta from the northern tundra who used rhythmic drumming to ease the minds of hunters after a long, dark winter. They were not powerful, they were not organized, they were fragments just like our stone had been, but as they gathered in the temple, something magical happened. They shared stories, techniques, songs. The human witch taught the keepers about a swamp root unknown in our forests. The island singers learned a more complex harmony from Seleni's scrolls. The drummers' rhythms were adapted for group meditations. The temple became a living library, a buzzing hive of rediscovery. The heartstone in the sanctuary seemed to sing with joy, its light shining brighter with each new connection, the integrated black vein now just a part of its beautiful, complex pattern. But such a conspicuous gathering could not go unnoticed by those who preferred the old divisions. Lord Torvin arrived at the temple gates unannounced, flanked by a contingent of hard-faced alphas from traditionalist packs. He did not request an audience, he demanded one in the middle of the bustling courtyard during a shared meal of the gathered healers. King Kaelen, Torvin's voice boomed, dripping with disdain as he looked around at the mixed assembly of wolves, humans, and others. What is this, a carnival? The heart of our kingdom is now a hostel for vagabonds and hedge wizards. You let the Luna fill the sacred woods with this rabble. The festive atmosphere died. All eyes turned to Kaelen and me. I felt a flush of the old anger, but it was quickly cooled by the new depth of understanding. This was fear speaking. Kaelen stood, his presence instantly commanding silence. This rabble, Torvin, is the living heritage of a world that existed before borders and suspicion. They are healers, story keepers. They are here by my invitation and the Luna's. They dilute our purity. Torvin shot back, appealing to the alphas with him. We are wolves, strong, proud, unified. This mixing weakens the blood, clouds the instinct. It was an old, hateful argument. Before I could speak, a voice rang out, clear and unafraid. It was the old human witch, Marta. She stepped forward, her back bent but her eyes fierce. Weakens, you say? Her voice was like dry leaves rustling. when the coughing fever swept your northern outposts 3 winters past, who sent the recipe for the tea that broke it? It was my grandmother to a wolf traitor she barely knew, not for gold, for kindness. That recipe is in your healer's kits now. Is that weakness, or is it a strength your purity couldn't brew? One of the island Omegas, a young woman named Neri, spoke next. When the great storm shattered our fishing boats and drowned our hope, it was the rhythm of the northern drums, she pointed to the beta drummer, that we heard in our hearts, given to us by a traveler years before. It kept our spirits from drowning in despair. Was that a clouded instinct or a clear song of survival? One by one, the rabble spoke, not with political arguments but with simple, undeniable stories of cross-species, cross-border kindness and shared knowledge that had saved lives, comforted the dying, and nurtured hope. Torvin and his alphas were speechless. They had come armed with rhetoric of strength and purity and were being disarmed by the gentle, relentless artillery of human decency. I finally stepped forward. You speak of the strength of the pack, Lord Torvin, and you are right, but you define the pack by its walls. We define it by its heart. A wall keeps things out, but it also cages you in. A heart connects. It sends life to every limb. These people, I gestured to the gathered crowd, are not a threat to our strength. They are new blood, new ideas, new songs for the heart of our pack. A body that does not grow, that rejects anything new, does not stay strong, it withers and dies. I walked up to Torvin, close enough to see the uncertainty finally breaking through the arrogance in his eyes. The beast you revered was a force of isolation. The king you now serve, and the Luna who stands with him, are forces of connection. Which legacy will you serve? The dying one of walls or the living one of roots? He had no answer. The alphas with him looked at each other, then at the diverse, defiant crowd, then at their king, who stood with the quiet, unshakable authority of a man completely sure of his path. Torvin's shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him. He had come to confront an illusion of weakness and found instead an impregnable fortress built on a foundation broader and deeper than he had ever imagined. He turned and walked away, his followers melting awkwardly into the crowd behind him. It was not a dramatic defeat, it was a quiet dissolution. The last bastion of the old, hard way simply found it had nothing left to stand on. That night, under a full moon, the entire council gathered in the temple sanctuary. Hundreds of voices from a dozen different species and cultures joined in a single, simple healing song. Each sang in their own language, their own style, but the harmony they created was transcendent. It was a sound the world had not heard for centuries. The heartstone blazed with light, not a column, but a radiant dome that arched over us all. In that moment, I didn't just see the temple as it was. I saw in a fleeting vision the network restored, not as a single dominant center, but as a constellation of points of light, of sanctuaries large and small across the world, all connected, all singing the same song of mercy in their own unique way. We had healed the stone. We had integrated the shadow, and now we had begun to reconnect the shattered world. The legacy of the moon's mercy was no longer a lonely ember in the woods of Vargin. It was a spark, and we had just given it a forest to light. The reign of the beast and the Omega was over. This was the dawn of the council, and it was just beginning. The success of the Council of Roots and Stone reverberated through the land like a profound, silent bell. The attendees returned to their homes, not as conquered subjects or odd visitors, but as emissaries of a new, interconnected reality. They carried with them scroll copies, new herbs, and most importantly, the lived experience of unity. The Heartstone's song, once confined to our sanctuary, began to be echoed in 100 different places, in a marsh witch's hut, an island longhouse, a tundra drum circle. Yet for Kaelen and me, at the center of this web, a curious emptiness followed the triumph. The great threats, the shadowed ones, the corrupted fragment, the ideological challenge of Torvin were past. The administrative work of integrating new knowledge and fostering connections was vital but routine. I found myself often in the temple archives, not studying for a crisis but drifting. Kaelen threw himself into the physical expansion of trade routes to accommodate the new exchanges, but I saw the restless energy in him. The beast had no war to fight, the king had no rebellion to crush, and the peace, however beautiful, felt static. It was during one of these listless afternoons that I found the box. Tucked behind a shelf of mundane tax records from a century ago, it was a small, unassuming thing made of dark wood, its surface smooth with age. There was no lock, only a simple clasp. Inside, resting on faded velvet, was not a scroll or a jewel, but a single dried white flower, a moonblossom, rare and said to only open under a true mate's gaze, and beneath it a folded letter. The script was my grandmother S. My breath caught. My dearest Anna, if you are reading this, the path has been longer and harder than I ever prayed for. I hid this here, in the heart of the kingdom's dullest records, knowing your curious mind would one day find it. I am sorry for the secrets. A dying woman's fear is a heavy chain. You know now of the temple of the keepers, but you do not know the whole truth of your blood. We were not just healers, we were the weavers. The first Alpha and Omega, the progenitors of our kind, were not just rulers or mates. They were two halves of a single soul spirit given form by the moon. The Alpha, the manifest spirit of action and protection. The Omega, the manifest spirit of perception and connection. The heartstone was their covenant made physical, a loom on which the fate of our people could be woven. Their bond was so strong it created a thread, an unseen connection that balanced the world, but in their mortality they feared their wisdom would die with them. So they shattered the stone, scattering its power, and their own essence was woven back into the bloodlines of their descendants. The beast that roars in the alphas is the echo of that first protector's raw power. The calm that whispers in the omegas is the echo of that first connector's deep sight. For generations, a true pair, an alpha and omega in whom both echoes burned brightest, would find each other. Their bonding would subtly strengthen the weave of the world, a quiet reinforcement. But the purges, the hatred, they damaged the weave, the threads frayed, the echoes grew distorted, the beast into mindless fury, the calm into passive submission. You, my child, are the strongest echo of the first Omega in generations, and Kaelen Blackmane is the strongest echo of the first Alpha. Your meeting was not chance, your bonding was not political, it was a cosmological imperative. The world itself, through the frayed weave, cried out for you to mend it. The kneeling, the recognition, it was the first stitch. Every life you've touched, every heart you've soothed, every connection you've forged at the council, these are not just good deeds. They are you and Kaelen, consciously and unconsciously reweaving the unseen thread. You are not just a queen and a king, you are the loom and the weaver. The temple is your shuttle, the stone is your needle. But beware, a weave under tension seeks balance. Your strength may call forth a final, opposite pull from the frayed ends of the old, broken pattern. I do not know what form it will take. Be vigilant, trust your bond. It is older than stone and stronger than fate. With all the love I could not show you openly, grandmother. The letter fell from my trembling hands, the world tilted on its axis. Our entire journey, the instantaneous recognition, the profound, non-romantic yet absolute bond, the way our powers complemented each other so perfectly, it wasn't just destiny. It was function. We were living components of a crumbling cosmic machine, now slowly grinding back into motion. I took the box and ran to find Kaelen. He was in the training yard, sparring with a guard, his movements a fluid display of controlled power that spoke of restless energy seeking an outlet. I waited at the edge until he finished, then wordlessly showed him the box and the letter. We retreated to the solar. He read it in silence, his face a mask of intense concentration. When he finished, he didn't look shocked, he looked resolved. It explains everything, he said, his voice low. The pull I felt towards you that first night, it wasn't just attraction, it was realignment. Like a lodestone finding north, he picked up the dried moonblossom, a true mate's gaze. We've never spoken of mates, of romance, our bond was something else, deeper. This is why. We're tools, I whispered, a hollow feeling in my chest, created to fix a broken world. No, he said fiercely, setting the flower down and taking my hands. His silver eyes bore into mine. We are the choice. The first ones made a choice to shatter their power and trust it to the future. The weave frayed because of countless bad choices, hatred, fear, greed. We are making different choices, every day. That is the reweaving. We are not tools, Anna. We are the hands that hold the needle, and we choose where to stitch. His words rebuilt the world anew, brighter than before. We weren't pawns, we were artisans of reality itself. But grandmother's warning echoed, a weave under tension seeks balance. The imbalance came not with a roar but with a deepening silence. Reports began to trickle in from the far southern reaches of Vargin, from the independent packs who had attended the council. Not of violence or sickness, but of a strange dulling. The land feels asleep, a messenger from the marshlands reported. The herbs grow, but their potency fades. The songs, they don't carry as they used to. It's as if the color is draining from the world. From the northern tundra, the rhythms still work, but they feel hollow, like an echo of an echo. The long dark feels heavier this year, the hope is thinner. It was as if the vibrant new tapestry we were weaving in the heart of the kingdom was drawing the very vitality, the very magic, from the outer edges of the loom. In trying to mend the central tier, we were straining the rest of the fabric to its breaking point. Master Fenris confirmed the dread theory. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only moved, he said, his face ashen. The heartstone, your bond, the council, it's creating a powerful nexus of the old magic here. It's a beacon, but a beacon draws light from somewhere. It is pulling the latent spiritual energy from the periphery towards the center. If it continues, the edges will become barren not just of magic, but of life force itself, a slow, spiritual withering. We had healed the stone, integrated the shadow, and connected the world, only to discover we were accidentally draining it, the ultimate irony. We have to stop the council, Lysandra said bluntly. Close the temple, dampen the stone. That would be like cutting out a heart to stop it from beating too strongly, I argued, despair clawing at me. It would mean surrendering all the good we've done, condemning the magic to fade entirely, just more slowly. Kaelen had been staring at the map, his fingers tracing the routes from the afflicted areas to the temple. We cannot stop the flow, he said, so we must redirect it. We don't need one heart, we need many. He looked at me, the strategist and the alpha echo fully aligned. The vision you had, the constellation of lights, that wasn't a fantasy, it was the solution. The temple cannot be the only nexus, we must create others. Smaller heartstones, smaller temples out there, to catch the energy and radiate it back locally, not hoard it all here. It was a monumental task. It required us to willingly share the very core of our power, to plant pieces of the heartstone elsewhere. It was a risk of unimaginable proportions, but it was the only choice that aligned with our purpose, not to rule from a central point of power, but to weave a balanced, resilient whole. We start with the places that are fading, I said, conviction steadying my voice. We take fragments of our stone and we teach them how to grow their own nexus, we spread the loom. It meant leaving the safety and centrality we had built, it meant fragmenting our power base. It was the ultimate act of trust in the weave we believed in. Kaelen nodded. Then we prepare for a new journey, not to find but to plant, not to gather but to sow. He took the dried moonblossom from the box and gently tucked it into the binding of my journal. The first ones sowed their essence in bloodlines. We will sow theirs and ours in stone and song. The unseen thread that connected all things was fraying at the edges because of our central knot. The answer was not to tighten the knot, but to tie more knots, creating a net that could hold the whole world. The decision to fragment the heartstone was met with tearful resistance from the senior keepers. It felt like a sacrilege, a step back into the very destruction we had healed from. But when Master Fenris explained the spiritual withering on the borders, understood not as a vague malaise but as a direct, lethal consequence of our centralization, the resistance turned to grim resolve. The ritual of division was the most delicate undertaking in the temple's short, new history. On the night of the full moon, with the entire council present, Kaelen and I stood on the dais. The stone pulsed between us, its light woven through with the silver-threaded darkness, a perfect map of integrated struggle and peace. We did not use a chisel, we used will. I placed my hands on one side, Kaelen on the other. We closed our eyes and reached for the core of the stone, not to break it, but to invite it to multiply. We poured into it our shared vision, not a single brilliant sun, but a galaxy of steady stars, each sustaining its own pocket of life. We showed it the fading marshes, the dulled tundra, the hungry edges of the world. We asked it humbly to let go. For a long, trembling moment, nothing happened. Then the stone's light intensified, becoming almost too bright to bear. A resonant hum filled the sanctuary, deepening until it was a physical vibration in the bones, and then, with a sound like a crystal chord, the heartstone bloomed. From its core, 7 smaller stones, each the size of a robin's egg and each containing a miniature, perfect swirl of silver and a hint of the integrated black, rose as if floating on water. They hovered around the original stone, which now glowed at its center, slightly dimmer but no less potent, connected to its children by faint, shimmering filaments of light. The constellation from my vision made real. A collective sigh of awe swept through the temple. It was not a breaking. It was a birthing. We chose the first 7 destinations from the areas most severely affected: the southern marshes, the northern tundra, 2 distant island packs, a secluded mountain valley, a dense, ancient forest, and the eastern clan's holy site. For each, a traveling party was assembled: a keeper, a guard, a builder versed in the temple's design, and a guide. Their mission was not to conquer, but to collaborate, to help the local communities build a small sanctuary and to nestle the childstone within it, teaching them the harmonies to awaken and sustain it. Kaelen and I led the party to the southern marshes, the place where the dulling had first been reported. It was a journey back to the beginning, in a way. The land did feel lethargic. The famous, vibrant greens of the mosses looked washed out, the songs of the rare birds were listless. Old Marta, the herb witch, greeted us with eyes that had lost some of their fierce spark. "The heart is going out of it," she said simply, her voice confirming our fears. We worked with her people not as sovereigns but as fellow laborers. Using local materials, woven reeds, living willow, peat brick, we helped them construct a simple, beautiful lodge on a hummock of firm ground, open to the sky and the water. It was a temple in spirit, but in form it was utterly of the marsh. On the night we were to place the stone, the entire community gathered in the new lodge. I held the childstone. It was warm and humming with potential. "This is not a gift from us," I told the gathered marsh dwellers, human and wolf-kind alike. "This is a piece of the world's own heart, returned to you. It will grow strong on your love for this place, on your songs, your stories, your healing. In return, it will help the land remember its own vitality. You are not receiving a power. You are becoming its guardian." I placed the stone in a cradle of woven reeds at the lodge's center. Kaelen stood beside me. Together, as we had done at the original temple, we reached out, but this time we did not push our energy into the stone. We gently ignited the connection between the stone and the people around us. "Sing with us," I whispered to Marta. She began an old marsh lullaby, a crooning tune about frogs and falling dew. Her people joined. Kaelen and I added our voices, not leading but harmonizing, weaving our stability into their local song. The child stone began to glow. A soft, green-tinged silver light like moonlight on water filled the lodge. It pulsed in time with the song. And as it did, I felt it, a gentle pull from the land itself, not a draining but a quenching. The stone was drawing up the latent, sleeping magic from the deep peat and stagnant channels, filtering it through the community's shared intention and radiating it back out as renewed vitality. Outside, a night-blooming marsh flower, dormant for days, unfurled its petals with an audible sigh. The listless bird songs from the reeds gained a sudden, clear note. The balance was shifting. The energy was not being sucked to a distant center, it was being cycled locally, lovingly. We repeated this journey 6 more times. To the tundra, where the child stone glowed with a stark, clean light that made the auroras dance brighter overhead. To the islands, where its light mixed with the sea spray to create tiny, temporary rainbows in the salt air. Each new sanctuary was unique, each activation song different, but the result was the same, a reawakening, a regrounding of magic in its native soil. The final journey was to the eastern clans, to Jerk's people. It was a full circle. We built the sanctuary on the holy site where their own ancient, forgotten spirit stone had once stood. When Jerk placed his hands next to ours on the child stone as his people sang a fierce, proud hymn of the mountains, the stone flared with a brilliant, gold-tinged light. The last thread of old enmity was not just severed, it was rewoven into a new pattern of mutual respect and shared guardianship. A year after the first division, messengers came not with reports of dulling, but with tales of resurgence. The marshes were more vibrant than ever, the herbs potent. The tundra's long night was filled with comforting rhythms that held despair at bay. Trade flourished, not out of necessity, but out of a newfound desire to share the unique blessings each star in our constellation created. Kaelen and I stood once more on the dais of the original temple. The central heartstone glowed steadily, connected by those faint, shimmering threads to its 7 children across the land. It was no longer the sole source of light, but the anchor of the network, the grand conductor of a symphony it no longer had to play alone. "The weave is mended," I said softly, leaning into his side, "not by one strong thread, but by a net of many." "The beast is at peace," Kaelen replied, his arm around me, his gaze on the stone. "Not because he is tamed, but because his strength is now part of the foundation, holding up the corners of the world so others can build upon it." We had come to the end of the story that began with a kneeling king and a shocked Omega. The legacy was no longer just protected, it was propagated. The kingdom was no longer just ruled, it was nurtured. That evening, under a sky scattered with real stars, the council gathered for a final feast before the visitors returned to their now strengthened homes. There was no grand speech. As the fire crackled and shared songs rose into the night, Kaelen simply raised his cup. His eyes found mine, silver reflecting the firelight and the deeper, steadier light of the fulfilled legacy we carried together. "To the constellation," he said, his voice carrying to all, "may it grow ever brighter." And as 100 cups were raised in answer, I knew the story was complete. They had tried to command the beast. The Omega had simply offered a different path, and in the end the beast had not been commanded, nor had he been tamed, he had been understood. And together we had shifted the world.